Section 1. The Origin. How a French animator built a world from rejected ideas. There is something almost unbearably poetic about the fact that The Amazing World of Gumball, a show fundamentally concerned with characters who were thrown away, forgotten, and deemed unworthy, was itself born from exactly those kinds of characters. The whole thing started with a pile of rejects, which, when you think about it, is one of the most beautifully fitting origin stories in the history of animation. So let us start at the beginning. Not the beginning of the show, but the beginning of the man who made it. Ben Bocquelet was born on the 27th of June, 1980, in Paris, France. He grew up in a small town near Marseille, and from everything he has said in interviews over the years, his childhood was a lot like Gumball's, in the sense that it was filled with curiosity, questions, and a slightly overwhelming intensity that the adults around him could not always keep pace with. He was the kind of kid who noticed things. Small things, strange things, the way the world does not quite fit together the way it is supposed to. That quality, that sense of the world being slightly off, slightly absurd, slightly more interesting than it appears on the surface, would later become the engine that drove everything about his show. He studied animation at the École des Métiers du Cinéma d'Animation in Angoulême, which is one of the most respected animation schools in France. It sits in a city that has a deep, almost sacred relationship with the visual arts. Angoulême hosts one of the world's most celebrated comics and graphic novel festivals every year, and the cultural atmosphere around visual storytelling that permeates the place likely had a formative effect on a young animator trying to figure out what kind of work he wanted to spend his life making. After completing his studies, he made his way to London, and it is in London where this story really begins to take shape. London in the 2000s was an extraordinary place for animation. The commercial animation industry there was doing some of the most creative, visually daring work in the world, largely because the discipline of advertising demands that you communicate an idea in a fraction of the time available to a feature film or a television series. Every second costs money. Every frame has to work. You develop an economy of storytelling that film and television rarely require, and that economy, applied to the full canvas of a longer format story, tends to produce things that are intensely concentrated and visually inventive. The British animation community in that period was punching well above its weight on the world stage, producing award-winning work for clients across every sector, and Studio AKA was one of the beating hearts of that community. He joined Studio AKA, a celebrated London-based animation company that had built its reputation primarily on commercial work. Studio AKA was known for a very particular kind of visual inventiveness, the kind that comes from having to communicate a feeling or sell an idea in 30 seconds or less. You do not have time for subtlety in commercial animation. You have to hit hard, be memorable, and disappear. It is a discipline that trains a very specific kind of thinking, and it clearly left a deep mark on Bocquelet. For several years at Studio AKA, he worked on pitches, advertising pitches, which meant he spent years designing characters, building small worlds, sketching personalities, and then losing. The competition in commercial animation is brutal. Dozens of pitches go out for everyone that gets commissioned, so Bocquelet was, by his own account, constantly creating characters that nobody wanted. He would put enormous care into a design, give it a look, a personality, a world, and then the client would go with someone else, and his creation would go into a drawer. He was not bitter about this. By all accounts, he seems to have found it fascinating. Because what happened to those characters? They existed. They had been thought about, designed, breathed into something resembling life, and then they were simply set aside, as though they had never been. Where do fictional characters go when nobody decides to use them? That question, whether Bocquelet consciously asked it or not, became the philosophical heart of everything he would eventually build. It is worth sitting with that question for a moment, because it has more weight than it initially appears to carry. We generally talk about fictional characters as though they are simply ideas, things a person thought of, words on a page or images on a screen. But anyone who has ever been genuinely moved by a story knows that characters can feel more substantial than that. They can feel like people. The grief you feel when a character dies in a book or a film or a show that you love is real grief. It does not have the permanent quality of losing someone you knew in life, but it has a real texture, a real weight. And if that is true, if characters can carry that kind of emotional substance, then what does it mean when they are discarded? When the pitch gets rejected and the character goes into a drawer? Did something real just stop existing? Bacalé spent years in that question without perhaps fully articulating it, and then he made a show that was entirely about it. In 2007, something shifted. Studio AKA's creative director encouraged him to join a new venture, Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe, a brand new Cartoon Network production hub based in London. The studio's purpose was to develop original animated content for Cartoon Network, which at the time was aggressively trying to build a European creative pipeline. Bacalé was hired to help other people pitch their ideas to the network. His job was to develop and support other people's concepts. But then the studio made a decision that would change everything. The executives at Cartoon Network told every employee to pitch their own original idea. If you were a development artist, a writer, a director, it did not matter. Everyone pitched. And Bacalé, sitting with years of discarded character designs stacked up somewhere in his memory and his sketchbooks, had a very clear idea. What if he took all those rejected characters, the ones from the failed commercial pitches, the ones nobody wanted, and put them all in one place? What if there was a school where all the characters who did not make it anywhere else had to attend? A remedial school for cartoon characters. A place where rejects went to try to figure out how to be useful, how to be interesting, how to be worth keeping. The concept was raw and strange and, if you think about it for more than a second, achingly personal. He was making a show about the thing that had defined his professional life up to that point. Being told that your creation is not good enough. The producers loved the core idea, but they felt the original framing was too sad, too bleak, too honest perhaps about the cold economics of the creative industry. So Bacalé revised it. He wrapped the concept in something warmer. He made it a family sitcom. He took the fundamental DNA, a world built from mismatched, miscellaneous, rejected characters who do not quite belong anywhere, and placed it inside the structure of an American suburban family comedy. The show was greenlit. It was approved for production in 2009 and then premiered on Cartoon Network on the 3rd of May. 2011, first as a sneak preview, and then officially on the 9th of May with the episodes that most of us probably remember as the very first thing we ever saw from Elmore. The US premiere was preceded by a UK sneak peek of the episode The Mystery on May 2nd, 2011, making it technically a show that reached British audiences first, which is appropriate for a show made in London wearing the costume of an American suburb. Here's a detail that tends to go unnoticed, but it quietly says everything about how the show was made and why it feels the way it feels. When Bacalé named the Watterson family, he named them after his own family. Nicole, the driven, brilliant, emotionally complicated mother, was named after his own mother. Richard, the enormous, gentle, hilariously useless dad, who somehow still manages to be the emotional warmth at the center of everything, was named after his father. Bacalé has described Richard in interviews as being based on his own father's enormous, cheerful, somewhat chaotic presence. His father as a giant man-child whose warmth was inseparable from his particular brand of unreliability. Anais, the tiny genius who is smarter than everyone else in any room she enters, was named after his sister. And Gumball? Gumball, the chaotic, impulsive, self-serving, but ultimately loving protagonist, is Bacalé's best guess at what he himself was like as a kid, with the caveat, which he has expressed with some sheepishness in interviews, that he is not quite as stupid as Gumball is. He also named the family Watterson, and this was entirely intentional. Bill Watterson is the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, considered by many to be the greatest comic strip ever produced. A man who created something transcendent and then simply walked away from it. Who refused to merchandise it, refused to license it, refused to let anyone else touch it. Who protected the integrity of his work with an absolute, uncompromising conviction, and then stepped back into private life when he decided the story was done. Bockley looked at that example and saw something profound about what it means to make something you love. And so he placed his fictional family inside a show that was itself about the fragility of fictional existence, and named them after a man who understood better than almost anyone what it means to let a story end on its own terms. That decision alone tells you the kind of creator Bockley is. This is not someone who stumbled into depth. Every choice carries weight, every detail is placed with intention. The show's comedy is not an accident. The show's philosophy is not an afterthought. Both are expressions of the same creative intelligence applied to the same set of questions from different angles. The show was the first full-length animated series ever produced by Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe. It was a British production, made in London, with post-production split between Studio Soy in Germany and Boulder Media in Dublin. The backgrounds were photographs taken primarily in and around London, which is part of why Elmore has that particular quality of feeling real and slightly wrong at the same time. It is real space, just like with the cartoon characters placed inside it. And it was renewed for a second season before the first episode had even aired on American television. Before we go any further into what the show became, it is worth pausing for just a moment on that. The show was renewed before it even aired. That is how much confidence the network had in what Bockley and his team had made. They saw something that was genuinely different from anything that existed in animation, and they knew it. Daniel Leonard, Vice President of Original Series and Development at Turner Broadcasting System Europe, greenlit the production and got behind it with real commitment. The rest of the industry would not quite catch up to that instinct for several more years, but the people at Cartoon Network Europe understood what they had, and they bet on it before anyone else could see the result. The amazing world of Gumball was, from the very first episode, not quite like anything that had come before it. And the reason why has everything to do with what it looked like. If you are listening to this right now, I want you to pause for a second and just let yourself settle in. Whatever time it is, wherever you are exactly where you need to be. Drop your shoulders. Let the weight of the day go for a little while. We are going to spend the next few hours together in Elmore, and I promise you it is a very good place to be lost. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. I genuinely love reading those. And if you are new to the channel, consider subscribing. It takes 1 second, and it means everything for keeping this kind of content going. Section 2, the visual language, how Elmore was built. There has never been a cartoon that looks quite like the amazing world of Gumball. There is that sentence, and then there's the question of why. Because describing it is one thing. Understanding why the choice was made, what it means, and how it actually works in practice is something else entirely. Bockley has spoken in interviews about being deeply influenced by Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the 1988 Robert Zemeckis film that combined live-action footage with animated characters in the same physical space. He was captivated by the idea that cartoons and the real world could coexist, that you could reach through the screen and feel the texture of the world those characters inhabited. He wanted children watching Gumball to believe that they could go on holiday to Elmore, that if they got in a car and drove in the right direction, they might eventually pull up to the Watterson's house on Lenox Avenue and ring the doorbell. He spoke about this desire in specific terms in his interview with Squiggly Animation magazine, saying he loved the idea that young children would ask their parents to go on holiday to Elmore because they wanted to hang out with Gumball. He wanted them to believe it existed. That ambition sounds simple, but its implications for production are enormous. To make a world feel genuinely real, you need real materials. Painted or illustrated backgrounds carry the weight of the imagination that produced them. They feel like somewhere someone thought of rather than somewhere someone could actually stand. But photographs carry the gravity of having been somewhere actual. They have light sources that real light produces. They have imperfections that only real spaces develop. They have the subtle density of a place that was made by time and use rather than by a pen or a stylus. The key figure in translating this philosophy into practice was the show's art director, Jan Hughuis, who developed the distinctive photographic background style and maintained its consistency across the production. London and its surrounding areas provided the raw material, streets, storefronts, parks, schools, domestic buildings, that were then processed in Photoshop, adjusted for color and tone, and placed beneath the animated characters. The result is a world that feels inhabited in a way that purely illustrated animation rarely achieves. To achieve that feeling, he made a decision that was radical in practical terms and almost casually transformative in its artistic impact. The backgrounds of Elmore are not painted, they are not illustrated. They are photographs. Real photographs of real streets, real storefronts, real suburban architecture taken primarily in and around London, England, and then placed under cartoon characters. The school is a photograph of a real building. The grocery store is a photograph. The streets that Gumball and Darwin walk through on their adventures are real streets that real people walk through every day. This is why Elmore feels so different from the world of Adventure Time or Regular Show or Steven Universe, all of which are drawn from pure imagination. Elmore is somewhere. You could look at a background from the show and recognize the kind of place it is because it is modeled on a real place. That grounding in physical reality gives the cartoon world a weight and a specificity that you almost never find in animation. But that decision to use photographic backgrounds was only the beginning of what made the show visually unique. Because once you have established a realistic physical world as your backdrop, you then have to decide what kind of characters populate it. And this is where Bakalay's history as a commercial animator becomes everything. Because his characters came from everywhere, they were designed for different projects, by different artists, using different techniques, for different purposes. And rather than try to unify them visually, Bakalay let them remain exactly what they were. Mismatched, incongruent, built from different stuff. Gumball and Darwin, the two main characters, are traditional two-dimensional hand-drawn animation, rendered cleanly and expressively. They look like classic cartoon characters. Tina Rex, the enormous T-Rex classmate, is full three-dimensional computer-generated imagery, rendered with a smoothness and weight that makes her look fundamentally different from the 2D characters around her. The Robinson family, the Wattersons' grumpy neighbors, are designed as Muppet-style fabric puppets, filmed with the physical texture and slight awkwardness that physical puppetry always carries. Molly Collins, before she disappeared into the void, looked like she had been sculpted from clay. Ocho the Spider is rendered entirely in the pixelated visual language of an 8-bit video game. And then there is Sussy. Sussy is a live-action chin filmed upside down with googly eyes attached to it inserted into the animated world as though someone accidentally dropped a piece of the real world into the cartoon and nobody thought to remove it. The software behind all of this was varied and fascinating. The 2D character animation in the later seasons was primarily done using Toon Boom Harmony. The 3D CGI elements were built in Autodesk Maya. The photographic backgrounds were processed and sometimes manipulated in Photoshop. The compositing that assembled all of these disparate elements into a single coherent frame was done in After Effects. It takes a remarkable team of artists and technical directors to make something this visually fragmented feel cohesive, and the fact that Gumball manages it as smoothly as it does is a genuine production miracle. It takes approximately 1 year to produce a single episode. At any given time during production, roughly 26 episodes are in various stages of development simultaneously. The London studio handled the creative core, writing, storyboarding, animatics, pre-production, and then the material would be sent to Studio Soy in Germany and to Boulder Media in Dublin for the actual animation work. The sheer coordination required to keep that pipeline running across 3 countries, across multiple different animation software platforms, using multiple completely different visual styles within the same episode, is staggering. And the show leaned into this complexity rather than hiding it. One of the most celebrated creative decisions Gumball ever made was inviting outside animators to come in and take complete creative control over specific sequences. In the episode called The Fury, which features an extraordinary fight between Nicole Watterson and her former rival Yuki Yoshida, the battle sequence was animated by Studio 4 Degrees Celsius, a prestigious Japanese animation studio with roots in theatrical anime. The result is one of the most visually stunning things in the entire run of the show, A sequence that feels genuinely like a 1980s shonen anime combat scene dropped into a Western children's cartoon. The visual shift is jarring and deliberate and absolutely brilliant, and it only works because the show has already established that nothing in Elmore is required to look the same. That principle of visual diversity was so deeply embedded in the show's DNA that it began to take on meaning beyond just aesthetics. Watch the show carefully and you start to notice a pattern. The characters who are closest to the Watterson family, the main characters, the family itself, are the ones rendered in the most conventional, polished, recognizable cartoon style. Gumball and Darwin are clean 2D. Nicole is sleek and expressive. Richard, despite his massive size, moves with a fluid naturalness. The further a character sits from the center of the narrative, the more their visual style diverges from that norm. The Robinsons look like they were made of fabric. Tina Rex feels like she belongs in a different dimension. Ocho is frozen in the pixelated past. It is as though proximity to the protagonist determines how fully rendered your reality is. The closer you are to Gumball, the more coherent your existence becomes. The further you drift toward the periphery, the stranger and more fragmented your visual representation becomes. Whether this was entirely intentional from the beginning, or whether it was a happy artistic accident that the writers and creators then leaned into consciously, is something only the creative team could really answer. But it is there, you can see it. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. There is also a recurring visual joke embedded in the backgrounds that almost nobody catches on first viewing. Because the backgrounds are photographs of real London streets, you can sometimes see real people in them. Real members of the public walking through the background of an animated show, entirely unaware that they are being immortalized in a cartoon. There are real cars, real shop signs, real buildings that you can look up and find if you know where to search. Elmore is not just imagined from London. In a very literal way, Elmore is London, dressed up and renamed. Director Mick Graves, who had worked with Bockelay at Studio AKA, and who became the series director on Gumball, described the visual philosophy simply and perfectly in an early interview. He said the range of animation techniques was the surface appeal, the thing that made people look twice. But the thing that made them stay was the writing. The thing that made them care was the storyboarding. The visual inventiveness was the door. What was inside the door was something else entirely. Section 3, the Watterson family, who they really are. You could spend an entire video just on the Watterson family and never run out of things to say. They are, on the surface, an extremely simple family. A mother who works too hard. A father who works not at all. A 12-year-old son who cannot stop causing problems. An adopted younger brother who is impossibly kind. A 4-year-old genius daughter who is smarter than everyone. This is the formula. These are the archetypes. But archetypes are just the outline. What you fill the outline with is what makes something live or die. And the Wattersons are filled with something real. Nicole Watterson is a blue cat, the same species as Gumball, and she works at the Rainbow Factory, which is exactly what it sounds like. A large industrial facility that apparently produces actual rainbows. She is the breadwinner of the family. She is also the most physically formidable character in the entire show, capable of feats of strength and speed that would comfortably qualify her as a superhero in most other fictional universes. She can run faster than sound. She can generate energy blasts that level buildings. She can perform martial arts of such extraordinary complexity and violence that the style appears to have at least partial roots in the fictional teachings of masters from Naruto and Fist of the North Star, which is an incredibly specific joke that the show makes entirely in passing. Her full name, it is revealed in the episode The Parents, is Dr. Nicole Watterson, née Senecor. Doctor is actually her first name. Nicole is her middle name. This detail is delivered as a throwaway joke and immediately abandoned, but it is representative of something true about how the show was written. The world building never stops, even when it is wearing the costume of a gag. Nicole's backstory, pieced together primarily from the episode The Choices, which is widely considered one of the finest episodes of the entire series, is one of the most emotionally complete portraits of parenthood that any animated children's show has ever attempted. Her father, Daniel Senecourt, had a violent temper. Her mother, Mary, was a perfectionist who measured Nicole's worth by her performance and found any imperfection worth commenting on. There is a shot in The Choices of young Nicole receiving her report card, which is full of outstanding grades, and her mother pointing furiously at the one category where she scored lower than perfect, her gender marking. The fact that she is a girl in her mother's view is a failure on the report card. This is played quickly as a sharp comedic beat. But if you are watching it as an adult who understands what kind of damage that kind of parenting does, it lands very differently. Nicole was a karate champion when she was young. She trained obsessively, and the show implies clearly enough that the obsessive quality of her training was directly related to the environment she grew up in. Physical discipline was something she could control when everything else felt uncertain. The karate was not just sport, it was survival. It was a space where the rules were clear and the measurements of success were objective, and nobody could question whether you had done well by finding something else to criticize. You either won or you did not. You either improved or you did not. In the dojo, unlike at her family's dinner table, excellence was sufficient. When she met Richard, she was choosing something. She chose gentleness over demanding perfection. She chose someone whose entire mode of existing was the opposite of the household she had grown up in. Richard does not demand excellence. Richard does not have expectations. Richard, famously, is incapable of having expectations because Richard can barely maintain a thought for more than a few minutes. He is present and warm and completely, radiantly, almost heroically without ambition. And Nicole, who had been crushed by ambition her whole life, found in that the closest thing she had ever felt to peace. Her parents did not attend her wedding. The show confirms this in The Choices without making a scene about it. It is just shown. The wedding, the empty seats where her parents should have been, and then life goes on because life always goes on. This is the show understanding something true about how people process certain kinds of loss. That there is a moment when you accept it, when you fold it into the fabric of your life rather than carrying it in front of you. And that acceptance is not the same as healing. And it is not the same as forgetting, but it is the thing that makes continuing possible. The result of all of this is a woman who is catastrophically overloaded at all times and who handles that overloading by becoming, when stressed, genuinely terrifying. Nicole's rage is not cartoonish. It is specific. It has a particular quality. Barely contained, technically precise, radiating the particular energy of someone who has been in crisis mode for so long that crisis mode is simply her resting state. In one episode, a school counselor suggests she try relaxing. She attempts it. Her inability to tolerate the absence of a problem to solve is played as comedy, but it is very specifically the comedy of someone whose nervous system was trained from childhood to treat calm as a warning sign. Not danger itself, calm. Peace is the thing her system has learned to distrust, because in her childhood, peace never lasted long. What is remarkable about the character is that the show never asks you to pity her or to excuse her. Nicole is genuinely frightening when she is at her worst. She has made mistakes. She has pressured her children. She has brought her own parental wounds into her parenting in ways that have not always been fair to Gumball or Darwin or Anais. The show is honest about this, but it is also honest about the love behind all of it, the overwhelming, occasionally badly expressed, never for a moment in question love that Nicole has for her family. She is the product of a difficult past. She is also the architect of a better future for her children than she had. Both of these things are equally true. Richard Buckley Watterson is a 38-year-old pink rabbit. He is 6 feet 4 inches tall. He has the appetite of a mythological creature and the attention span of a moderately well-trained Labrador. He is the laziest person in Elmore. And this is not a casual description. In the episode The Laziest, we learn that Richard stole this title from a character named Larry Needlemeyer in the summer of 1983, when both of them were at a competition to determine the most idle person in the town. Richard's victory was so thorough and absolute that Larry, rather than live with the shame of second place, went completely in the opposite direction and became the hardest working person in Elmore, which is how he ends up holding 38 jobs simultaneously. The implications of this origin story are considerable. Richard's laziness is not just a personality trait, it is a title. It is a role. And in Elmore, as the show makes increasingly clear over the course of 6 seasons, roles have a weight that goes far beyond personal choice. There is an episode called The Job in which Richard, through an improbable chain of events, gets hired as a pizza delivery driver. The moment he begins actually working, actually fulfilling responsibilities, actually contributing economically to the world, reality begins to collapse. The sky cracks open, buildings warp, physics breaks down. The universe itself, the episode suggests, cannot accommodate Richard Watterson holding gainful employment. His family has to race to get him fired before the fabric of existence tears completely apart. He is not lazy by choice. He is lazy because being anything else would destroy everything. This is funny. It is also, if you sit with it for longer than the joke requires, quietly devastating. Because Richard is not a bad father. He is, in fact, in many ways, an exceptional one. He is present. He is physically affectionate. He plays with his children. He is emotionally available in ways that Nicole, stretched thin across every responsibility in the household, sometimes cannot be. The episode The Hero addresses this directly. Gumball and Darwin accidentally mock Richard's uselessness, and he overhears them. His devastation is genuine. And the episode becomes, slowly and tenderly, about the boys realizing that their father's gentleness, his willingness to be goofy and embarrassing and absolutely without pretension, is the specific gift he gives to his family. He makes the house feel safe. He makes failure feel survivable. He is the soft place in a family that, without him, would be nothing but sharp edges and high expectations. The universe will not let him be a pizza delivery man, but the universe gave his kids a father who shows up every single day, without being asked, without receiving credit, without even fully understanding what he is doing. He just loves them, loudly, messily, and completely. Anais Watterson is 4 years old and smarter than everyone you have ever met. She is a pink rabbit, like her father, and she is enrolled in classes at Elmore Junior High that are populated by children who are 8 or 9 years her senior because no class in the regular school system could accommodate what she is intellectually capable of. Her middle name, as revealed in an episode of the Gumball Chronicles, is because Richard did not have enough time to choose a proper middle name when she was born, and that was the sound he made while he was thinking. She speaks 4 languages. She understands advanced mathematics. She has the emotional intelligence of someone 2 or 3 times her age in some situations, and the emotional intelligence of a 4-year-old in others, which is where most of her most affecting moments come from. She tries desperately to make friends and consistently sabotages herself through intensity and clinginess. In The Friend, she creates an imaginary companion, a terrifyingly violent one because the real ones keep not working out. The family dynamic that these 5 characters create is one of the most genuinely functional, dysfunctional families in animation. They drive each other mad. They cause each other immeasurable quantities of property damage and emotional distress. They embarrass each other, challenge each other, and exhaust each other. And they clearly, obviously, without any ambiguity whatsoever, love each other completely. The love is never in question, even in the worst episodes, even when Gumball is being catastrophically selfish, or Nicole is being terrifyingly controlling, or Richard has accidentally set the house on fire for the 4th time this week. The love is never in question. That is the trick. That is why the show works when everything should be too much. Section 4. Gumball and Darwin. Brothers, best friends. 2 of the strangest characters in animation. Gumball, Christopher Watterson. 12 years old. Blue cat. His first name is Zach, legally changed to Gumball in the episode The Name. When an alternate personality named Zach began to emerge and take over, and the family went to court to change the name back. His sweater was found by his father in a sewage outlet. He has 6 whiskers, but due to the angle of his head, only 5 are usually visible. He is terrible at catching things. He has arachnophobia. He once legally changed his middle name from Christopher to Tristopher because Richard wrote it down wrong on the birth certificate and it was never corrected. He is also almost certainly on some level aware that something is wrong with the world he lives in. This is the theory that has occupied the Gumball fan community for years, and unlike most fan theories, this one has real textual support. The basis of it comes from a piece of academic writing by economist Robin Hanson called How to Live in a Simulation, which argues that if a person somehow became aware they were living inside a simulated reality, they would exhibit specific behavioral patterns. They would be more reckless because the perceived stakes of any individual action would be lower. They would take bigger risks because the simulation could end at any moment and there would be nothing to lose. They would try to be as interesting as possible because in a world where your existence depends on being entertaining, interest is survival. They would perform for an audience they cannot see. Gumball does all of these things. His impulsiveness is not random. His chaos is not accidental. His constant need to make situations more dramatic, more absurd, more extreme than they need to be functions in exactly the way Hanson's paper describes. He is not consciously aware that he is in a show. But he behaves as though somewhere deep in his architecture, there is a system running that is optimizing for continued existence through continued interest. He performs. He escalates. He refuses to let situations resolve quietly because quiet resolution is boring and boring is dangerous. The episode The Others is perhaps the clearest expression of this anxiety. Gumball discovers that a girl named Claire Cooper at his school has her own life, her own narrative, her own problems and storylines that have nothing to do with him. He is fascinated and then unsettled and then genuinely threatened. Because if other stories exist alongside his story, then his story is not the only story. And if his story is not the only story, then maybe it can be replaced. He immediately tries to inject himself into Claire's narrative, to make it about him, to reclaim centrality. The episode resolves with a lesson about humility. But the anxiety underneath that lesson, the specific existential terror of being not the protagonist, never quite goes away. The Downer is an episode from Season 2 that takes a more direct run at Gumball's inner life. He wakes up and the house is empty, the streets are empty. Elmore has been evacuated. And at first he is delighted because no rules, no responsibilities, no one to answer to. But the emptiness accumulates. The silence becomes oppressive. The familiar places become alien. The episode reveals, slowly and with real craft, that Gumball has not woken up in an empty Elmore. He has woken up inside his own depression. The external world has been stripped of warmth and color and presence to reflect what is happening internally. The other characters did not leave. He just cannot feel them anymore. It is one of the most accurate depictions of what a depressive episode actually feels like that any animated show has ever managed. The colors drain. The geometry of familiar spaces becomes unfamiliar. The sense of absence is not about the absence of people, but about the absence of connection, the inability to feel the warmth that you know is there. The show delivers this in 11 minutes, wrapped in comedy, to an audience that mostly consists of children. Darwin Watterson is 10 years old, a goldfish with legs, and the most genuinely good character in the show. He is also one of the most quietly disturbing if you follow certain questions to their logical conclusion. He started life as the family goldfish, not even the first one. There were several Darwins before the current Darwin, each one dying and being replaced until the final one arrived. When he was accidentally flushed down the toilet during a moment of domestic chaos, he was swept through the sewers of Elmore, across an entire city, through environments that should have killed him many times over, and he evolved. He grew legs. He developed lungs. He acquired speech and consciousness and feeling and love. He crawled back up out of a storm drain and stood on two legs for the first time and found his brother again. The show explains this with the concept that Gumball's love for Darwin was so absolute, so complete, so refusing to accept the alternative that the universe reshaped Darwin to match it. Love in Elmore is apparently a more fundamental force than biology, which is a beautiful idea. But the other way to look at Darwin's origin is considerably less comfortable. Darwin was not a person. Darwin was a fish. Fish do not have personalities. Fish do not have moral frameworks or emotional intelligence or the capacity for the kind of devoted, patient, endlessly loyal companionship that Darwin provides for Gumball throughout the entire run of the show. Everything that Darwin is was given to him, not by his own choices or his own development, but by a force outside him. Call it the narrative, call it the universe, call it the show's need for a particular kind of character that decided he needed to be something specific. He needed to be the loyal sidekick, the moral compass, the voice of reason and kindness. So that is what he became. If that is true, then is Darwin actually Darwin? Is the loyalty his, or was it installed? Is the goodness his, or is it his role? The show pokes at this question in various ways over the years, most directly in the crossover episode The Puppets, where a puppet takes control of Darwin and tells him he is not really alive. He is just a character in a show. Darwin's response is terror. Raw, wordless, absolute terror, which suggests that somewhere in him, the question is not entirely without resonance. Darwin was voiced originally by Kwesi Boakye, then by Terrell Ransom Jr., then by Daniel T. Hansley Jr., then by Christian J. Simon, and most recently by Hero Hunter in the revival series, The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball. The show has a fascinating relationship with its own voice casting for the main characters, primarily because Gumball and Darwin are voiced by child actors who inevitably grow up and whose voices change. This becomes a plot point in the Season 3 episode The Kids, where Gumball and Darwin hit puberty. Their voices break, and then the universe resets them back to their younger selves with new voices and new actors, as though the world itself refuses to let them age. It is one of those moments where the show's meta-awareness of its own fictional nature is so perfectly integrated into the storytelling that it barely registers as a fourth wall break. It is just the show being honest about what it is. Gumball was voiced by Logan Grove for the first 2 seasons, then by Jacob Hopkins from Season 3 through part of Season 5, then by Nicholas Cantu from Season 5 through Season 6, then by Duke Cutler for the Gumball Chronicles, and most recently by Alcayo Thiele in the revival. Each transition was handled with that same meta-awareness, that winking acknowledgement that this is a television show in which children grow up and need to be replaced. And the show knows it, and the show thinks that is worth commenting on rather than pretending it is not happening. The original pilot episode of the show, which never aired publicly but exists in animation history, as a document of what Gumball looked like before it became what it became, featured a completely different design for Gumball. He was not a blue cat. He was rendered differently, with different proportions, a different energy. Darwin in the pilot was computer-generated rather than 2D animated. Neither of them looked like themselves. The familiar Gumball we know is already several revisions removed from the original concept, which is something the show seems to be aware of and seems to find interesting. The relationship between these two characters is the beating heart of the show. Everything else radiates outward from it. When it works, when Gumball and Darwin are genuinely trusting each other, genuinely having each other's backs, genuinely being the kind of friends and brothers who make everything better just by being in the same space, those are the moments when the show earns its title. Those are the moments that make you feel, for a little while, that Elmore is actually the most wonderful place in the world. Section 5. The Supporting Cast. Elmore's Extraordinary Gallery of Strangers. One of the things that makes Gumball genuinely special among animated shows is the depth and variety of its supporting cast. Most cartoons have a handful of peripheral characters who exist primarily to be recognizable faces in crowd scenes. Gumball has over 100 named, individually designed characters who each come from a completely different aesthetic tradition. And many of them have received enough focused attention to feel like real people. Let us spend some time with the ones who deserve it most. Penny Fitzgerald is a shape-shifting fairy who spent the first 3 seasons of the show hiding inside a shell that made her look like a peanut with antlers. Her full name is Penelope Fitzgerald. She is voiced by Teresa Gallagher, who also voices Nicole, Terry, Mrs. Robinson, and roughly 8 other named characters, each with a distinct and perfectly maintained vocal identity, which is one of the most impressive sustained voice acting performances in British animation. The episode The Shell, which aired in Season 3 and currently holds a 9.4 rating on IMDb, making it one of the highest-rated individual episodes of any animated series on the platform, is the episode where Penny's shell comes off. Gumball accidentally cracks it open during a school play and Penny runs, terrified of what he might see, of what everyone might see. Because without her shell, she is not a peanut. She is a being of pure light and shape and feeling, whose physical form shifts depending on her emotional state. When she is joyful and confident, she glows soft gold and luminous. When she is angry, she becomes a dragon. When she is frightened and self-loathing, she becomes a monster that the entire city's pest control department has to mobilize to address. She is, in other words, a person whose inner life is completely and unavoidably visible. She cannot lie about how she feels. She cannot perform composure. Everything she feels is immediately, indelibly, physically expressed. Her father Patrick had tried to keep her in the shell for this reason, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Because the Fitzgerald family had been wearing shells for generations, telling each other that their true forms were too volatile, too dangerous, too much for the world to handle. The shells were not just cosmetic. They were containment suits for people who had been taught that their emotional lives were threats to be managed rather than realities to be lived. The Fitzgerald family mythology, expanded significantly in the episode The Modane from the Revival series, reveals that the tradition of shell wearing goes back further than Penny's grandparents. Every generation was told the same thing. Their shape-shifting abilities made them dangerous. Their emotions, if uncontrolled, made them a threat to the people around them. The shells were safety equipment, yes, but they were also the physical expression of a family, teaching that had been passed down across generation. You are too much. Hide it, keep it in. Protect the world from what you are. Penny is the first person in her family's history to reject that teaching. The cost is her father's fury, her family's discomfort, and the specific loneliness of being someone who chose honesty in a family that had built its entire culture around protective concealment. The episode won Best Children's Series and the Children's Choice Award at the British Animation Awards in 2016. It is the episode that fans most often cite when asked to recommend Gumball to someone who has never seen it. And it deserves every word of praise it has received. Carrie Kruger is a ghost. She was born a ghost, has always been a ghost, and will presumably always be a ghost. She floats through the corridors of Elmore Junior High in a state of perpetual deadpan sarcasm, her dark sense of humor and her love of horror making her the show's resident goth figure. She is Darwin's girlfriend, a relationship that develops slowly over 5 seasons before becoming official in the Season 5 episode The Matchmaker, and their romance is simultaneously one of the sweetest and most impossible things in the show. Darwin will age, Carrie will not. Darwin will finish school, grow up, build a life. Carrie will still be at Elmore Junior High when the school has been rebuilt 3 more times and every other student has long since graduated. Their love is real, and it is tender, and it is bounded by a fact that neither of them can change, and that the show never pretends is not there. She cannot eat food. She can only taste things by possessing other people's bodies, which she does occasionally throughout the series, and the show treats this with a kind of matter-of-fact sadness that never becomes melodramatic. It is simply true. She is dead, and being dead means certain things are unavailable to her, and she has made a kind of peace with that while also clearly not having entirely made peace with it. The balance between those two states is what makes her one of the most quietly affecting characters in the whole show. The show never explains how she died. This is deliberate. Ben Bockley and his writing team understood that explaining it would change something fundamental about how the audience relates to her. As long as we do not know, she can be anyone's experience of loss. She can be about anyone who died too young, for any reason. The moment you specify, you narrow the resonance. The blankness is the point. In the episode The Matchmaker, which officially establishes the Carrie and Darwin relationship, there is a scene where Darwin finally expresses his feelings for her in a song. The song is called Without You, performed by Doniel T. Hansley Jr., and it carries the specific emotional weight of someone who has been waiting a very long time to say something, and has found a way to say it that is both funny and absolutely true. The show lets that moment exist without cutting it off, without deflating it with a comedic interruption. It breathes. And that breathing is one of the most telling things about the show's relationship to the characters it loves. Larry Needlemeyer is an origami-style rock figure who works at every single business establishment in Elmore. Every single one. He is the cashier at the grocery store, the attendant at the gas station, the manager at every fast food outlet, the video store clerk, the mall Santa, the movie theater usher, the ice cream vendor. He holds, by his own count in the episode The Menu, 38 jobs simultaneously. He makes $7 an hour. He apparently does not sleep. He is voiced by Carrie Shale, who also voices Leslie, Alan Keene, and Hector, among others. In the episode The Pizza, Larry finally snaps. He has been mistreated and disrespected by the Watterson family one too many times, and he quits. He quits everything, all 38 jobs at once. What follows is the literal collapse of Elmore's economy and social infrastructure. Stores close. Services stop. The town descends into chaos. People riot over the unavailability of basic goods and services. One man, 38 jobs, the entire functioning of a town. The implication is not subtle, but it is profound. Larry is not a hard worker because he enjoys working. Larry works himself to the point of sleeplessness and probable psychological collapse because he is terrified of what happens if he stops. He has watched characters get erased for being unimportant. He has seen what happens to people without a role. So he accumulated roles, as many roles as Elmore has to offer. He made himself the single most essential person in the town's economy, ensuring that no conceivable process of quality control could ever find a reason to remove him. He is not surviving. He is not living. He is performing his own necessity with such thoroughness and such consistency that the universe has no choice but to keep him around. Larry has a girlfriend named Karen, a small detail confirmed in the character documentation and occasionally referenced in passing. The show never explores their relationship in any significant depth, but the detail matters because it humanizes him. He is not just a function. He is a person with a relationship, with a life outside of the 38 jobs, with something to come home to when the last shift ends. Which makes the sleeplessness, the overwork, the constant exploitation all the more affecting. Miss Lucy Simeon is Gumball's teacher at Elmore Junior High, a baboon who has been teaching, according to various episodes' implications, since approximately 2 million years ago. She predates agriculture. She predates writing. She predates Homo sapiens having sufficient cognitive architecture to constitute a formal student. She has been teaching middle school children since before the concept of middle school, or children or teaching, had been invented. She is exhausted. She hates teaching. She hates Gumball specifically. She hates the entire institution of education with the passionate conviction of someone who has been doing the same job for 2 million years and who has long since stopped believing it accomplishes anything at all. Her relationship with Principal Brown, the indeterminate fuzzy creature who runs Elmore Junior High with a mixture of incompetence and romantic distraction, is one of the show's most consistently comic pairings. Principal Brown is in love with Miss Simeon. Miss Simeon tolerates Principal Brown with the weary affection of someone who has been at the same posting so long that even the most irritating presence eventually becomes familiar. They are together a portrait of institutional inertia. Two people who have been in the same building for so long that the building has effectively become them. The episode The Ape from the first season sets up the fundamental dynamic between Nicole and Miss Simeon in a way that the show never quite abandons. Miss Simeon calls the Wattersons losers. Nicole responds by ramming her car off the highway. The proportionality is entirely absent, and the show uses that disproportion to establish something true about Nicole. Her capacity for violence is not irrational. It is disproportionate, yes, but it has a logic. She protects her family the way someone who was never protected protects the people she loves. Absolutely, without gradation, without the kind of measured response that someone who grew up feeling safe might manage. Banana Barbara has already received attention in this script, but her son, Banana Joe, deserves a brief moment too. He is funny, he is loud, he tells bad jokes. His catchphrase, "I am a banana" was actually only spoken once in the entire run of the show, in the episode The Robot, and yet it became so associated with him that most people assume he says it constantly. The gap between memory and reality is one of the show's recurring jokes about how audiences construct relationships with characters. Masami Yoshida is a cloud, a sentient, wealthy cloud whose family owns the rainbow factory where Nicole works. Her emotional volatility, when it manifests, takes the form of actual weather. When Masami is unhappy, it rains. When she is furious, storms arrive. The show uses this as comedy, but the underlying concept that a child's emotional state has literal meteorological consequences is the kind of image that sticks. Masami's character arc across the show is not particularly extended, but the episodes that focus on her tend to circle around the specific loneliness of being the richest person in any room. She can buy anything, she can manipulate most situations, but she cannot manufacture the specific quality of closeness that comes from genuinely being valued rather than being deferred to. Her friendships are always slightly performance, slightly transaction, whether she knows this is one of the show's more interesting unresolved questions. Idaho is a potato. He is a sentient potato who goes to school with Gumball and Darwin, whose family lives on a farm and who exists in a world where things that look exactly like him are routinely consumed as food. He sits in a cafeteria where his classmates eat potato chips. This detail is never explicitly addressed as horrifying. The show treats it as simply the condition of Idaho's existence, which is, in its own way, more disturbing than if it had been played for shock. Hector Jotunheim is so large that he cannot fit through most doors. His mother controls him through fear of what will happen if he lets himself feel things strongly, because his enormous physical size makes his emotions structurally dangerous to everyone around him. In the episode The Colossus, we see what happens when he gets upset. Buildings come down. People are hurt. The scale of the destruction is directly proportional to the intensity of the feeling. He has been taught that he is too much, that expressing himself is equivalent to hurting people, that the only responsible thing he can do with his emotional life is suppress it completely. The show does not resolve this. It does not give Hector a triumphant moment of appropriate self-expression. It acknowledges the situation, finds the comedy in its extremity, and moves on, which is, in some ways, the most honest thing it could do. Because for many people, the story of being told you are too much does not have a clean resolution. It has a life spent managing a thing that was never wrong to begin with. And here's the show's most generous quality. It holds all of these characters, all of these specific and complex and sometimes very dark situations, inside a frame of love. Elmore is full of people who are struggling and damaged, and sometimes cruel and sometimes brilliant, and sometimes terrifyingly sad. And the show loves all of them. Not uncritically, not without acknowledging what is genuinely wrong, but with the consistent warmth of a creator who looked at his pile of rejected characters and decided that every single one of them deserved a home. Section 6. The Void. The most original concept in children's television. The Void is introduced in the Season 3 episode also called The Void, and it changes everything that comes before and after it. Here is the concept. Elmore is a world with quality control. The universe has standards and things that do not meet those standards. Characters who are too boring, concepts that are too dated, ideas that have failed to find an audience, fads that have passed their moment, are collected and removed. They are sent to a dimension built from television static, a place that exists just outside the normal fabric of Elmore's reality, where forgotten and unwanted things accumulate. This is the void, and inside it, everything that the universe has decided is a mistake sits in a kind of limbo, stripped of memory, stripped of context, existing without purpose in a space that is itself made of the visual texture of nothing. Gumball and Darwin and Mr. Small are there when the void is first discovered, because a classmate named Molly Collins has gone missing. Not missing in the normal sense. Missing in a more fundamental way. Her friends cannot remember her. Their memories of her are fragmenting and dissolving. Photographs of her are developing blank. She is being erased not just from physical space, but from the memory of everyone who knew her. By the time they reach the void to rescue her, she is almost gone. The show plays this sequence with real skill. There is genuine unease in watching a character you have just met be forgotten in real time, her face and name and presence slipping from the grasp of the people who should hold on to them. Molly was sent to the void because the universe considered her boring. Her personality was too ordinary, too soft, too uninteresting to justify her continued presence in Elmore's reality. She did not have enough narrative function, so she was removed. This is where the show stakes out its most extraordinary philosophical position. In Elmore, your right to exist is conditional. It depends on whether you are interesting enough, useful enough, narratively necessary enough to justify taking up space in the world. If you are not, you are erased. And not just removed from physical space, the record of you is rewritten. The people who loved you forget you. The places you inhabited no longer hold the impression of your presence. You are made to have never existed. For a children's show, this is an absolutely audacious concept to put front and center. And the show does not flinch from it. It commits to it completely and then builds an entire second mythology on top of it over the next 3 seasons. Because while Gumball and Darwin rescue Molly, they miss someone else. Standing in the background of the void, trying to get their attention, waving, calling out, is a character who has been there for longer than Molly. A background character from the first 2 seasons of the show. A tall blue cyclops with no storyline, no development, no family, no real presence. A character who had been standing in crowd scenes for 2 full seasons without anyone ever thinking to give him a name or a purpose. Rob. He sees Gumball and Darwin. He knows this is his chance. He grabs onto the back of Mr. Small's van as it escapes the void. And the void fights back. It pulls at him, it tears at him, it distorts his body, warping it with the visual language of the dimension it comes from. Static, glitches, polygonal corruption. By the time he makes it back to the real world, he is fundamentally broken. His head is shaped like a cracked television screen. His body is covered in the texture of digital error. He hides in the Watterson's basement with amnesia. He knows somehow that he does not belong anywhere. He cannot articulate what happened to him. He just knows he was somewhere terrible and that nobody came for him. That the 2 boys whose van he clung to walked right past him when they had the chance to help. The void across the rest of the show's run takes on increasingly layered significance. It is revealed, through Rob's investigation in the later seasons, to be not simply a garbage dimension for the universe's mistakes, but something closer to the ultimate fate of Elmore itself. If the show ends, the void consumes everything. It is cancellation, made physical. It is the oblivion that waits at the end of every story that runs out of audience. The visual design of the void is meticulous and strange. It is built from the aesthetic of unrendered digital assets, low polygon models, wireframe graphics, 8-bit sprites, the visual detritus of incomplete or abandoned media. It looks like the inside of a crashed computer. It looks like what you see when a video file corrupts mid-playback. It looks exactly like what you might expect the space where forgotten media accumulates to look like. A vast, featureless territory built from the wreckage of things that were begun but never completed. The episode The Vegging, which aired in Season 6, contains a single shot that most viewers probably missed. The background panel outside the Watterson family's living room window collapses, and beyond the collapsed background panel, just visible for a moment, is the void. It is just sitting there, right outside the window. A reminder that the distance between Elmore and Oblivion is not actually very large at all. There is also a moment in the episode The Compilation when Darwin accidentally breaks a screen, and through the broken screen for just a second you can see the void looking back. These are not accidents. They are the show placing its existential threat right at the edge of every frame, right at the border of visibility, a reminder that the world the characters inhabit is more fragile than it looks. The revival series, The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, which premiered on Hulu on the 28th of July, 2025, confirmed at the 2024 Annecy International Animation Film Festival that Season 7 would reveal what is actually inside the void. The episode called The Rewrite, which serves as the revival's major narrative resolution, delivers on that promise and resolves the cliffhanger that the original series left dangling from 2019. Rob is saved from the void by the mysterious van shopkeeper, given a new purpose as Elmore's guardian against the void's return. And the show establishes that the void's destruction of the world can be triggered either by the show's actual cancellation or by the main characters discovering that they are fictional. That last condition is particularly interesting. The void is held at bay specifically by the characters' ignorance of their own nature. The moment they know what they are, the protection disappears. Knowledge, in Elmore, is the most dangerous thing of all. Section 7. Rob, the most complete character arc in children's animation. Before we talk about who Rob is in full, let us talk about who Rob was not. In Seasons 1 and 2 of The Amazing World of Gumball, Rob is nothing. He is not a character. He is a shape standing in a crowd. A tall blue cyclops present in backgrounds, filling space in hallways and classrooms as anonymous as a chair. His name is not mentioned. He has no lines. He has no storyline. He does not exist as a person in any meaningful sense. He is there the way that background detail in a painting is there. Necessary for the composition, entirely unimportant in itself. This is obviously completely intentional. The show waited 2 full seasons before revealing that this background detail had been, the entire time, a person. A person with feelings and awareness and a consciousness that was accumulating the experience of being overlooked every day in real time. Rob was not introduced as a new character. He was retroactively revealed to have always been there. Which means every scene he appeared in, every crowd shot, every classroom background, every hallway moment, all of those were scenes in which a conscious, feeling being was standing right there, being invisible. Think about what that means as a creative decision. The show ran for 2 full seasons, 40 episodes, in the original production format of 22-minute episodes divided into segments, with Rob present in the background of many scenes, unnamed and unacknowledged. The writers knew he was there. They knew what they were doing. They were accumulating the weight of his invisibility before giving it a name and a face. By the time the show tells you that this background figure has been aware the whole time, you have 2 years' worth of his invisibility to feel all at once. His escape from the void and its consequences are covered in the previous section. What happens after is where Rob becomes something rare and genuinely extraordinary in animation. He takes on the identity of Gumball's nemesis. Not because he is evil, not because he wants to destroy anything, but because Gumball and Darwin, in their typically well-meaning and catastrophically thoughtless fashion, pointed out to Rob that every positive role in Elmore was already taken. The hero, the sidekick, the love interest, the class clown, the reliable friend, all occupied. The only vacant space was the villain. And Rob, desperate for any identity at all, rather than the oblivion of having no identity, took it. He becomes the bad guy because the alternative is being erased again. He constructs a villainy that he does not believe in, a performance of antagonism driven not by malice but by existential necessity. He needs a role. This is the only role available. He takes it. And the show, to its enormous credit, never lets you forget what that role is costing him. Rob is the villain the way someone takes a job they are not suited for because they cannot afford to be without income. It gets him through the week, it gives him something to be. But it is not him. It was never him. The character's physical appearance in the show, post-Void, is itself a kind of visual argument about what it means to be caught between states of existence. Rob looks like a damaged broadcast signal given a body. His head is shaped like a cracked television screen. His body carries the visual texture of glitch art, static, polygonal corruption, the aesthetic of digital error. He is literally a character who was consumed by the space between what he was supposed to be and what the show was willing to make him. He is made of the gap. In the Season 4 two-parter The Disaster and the Rerun, Rob acquires the universal remote from the van shopkeeper, a device that can pause, rewind, fast-forward, and otherwise manipulate the reality of Elmore as though it were a television broadcast. The concept is elegant and terrifying. The rules of television editing applied literally to the world inside the television. Rob uses it to torment Gumball, to trap him, to demonstrate what it feels like to have no control over your own existence. He is showing Gumball the world as Rob experiences it. And then, in one of the most quietly devastating sequences in the show, Rob reverses everything. He rewinds the entire day. The damage he caused is undone. Darwin, who died in the course of the episode, lives again. Everything is restored. But the reversal also erases the reconciliation. The moment where Gumball, seeing Rob's genuine pain, reached out and tried to help. The moment where Rob saw something real and responded to it. That is gone too. Rob is alone again. Gumball does not know what he gave up. Gumball barely knows Rob exists in the proper sense in the episode that follows. Rob gave up the only moment of connection he had ever experienced in order to do what was right. Nobody knows. The universe did not witness it as a sacrifice. It erased it. And Rob woke up the next morning still the villain, still alone, still wearing the role that was the only one available to him. By season 6, Rob's arc transforms completely. He is no longer trying to destroy Gumball. He is trying to save everyone. He has figured out what the void actually is, not just a garbage dimension, but the end of everything. And he has spent significant time and effort trying to understand it, trying to prepare, trying to build some form of resistance. He kidnaps Banana Barbara not as an act of villainous terror, but as an act of desperate preparation. He needs a prophet who can see what is coming so he can figure out how to stop it. When Barbara's paintings show only static, when she tells him there is no future, he does not give up. He improvises. He goes deeper. He infiltrates the school system using a live-action human identity, Superintendent Evil, and begins the systematic transformation of every student and teacher into a form that might survive the Void's destruction. His plan in the Inquisition, the original series finale, has an internal logic that is genuinely sound. If the characters are real people, live-action humans, inhabitants of the physical world, rather than the animated one, then the Void's destruction of the animated world cannot touch them. They would have crossed the border into reality before the animation was consumed. Rob is trying to smuggle the entire cast of the show into the real world before the show ends. Gumball stops him, because Gumball does not understand. Gumball has spent the whole show refusing to engage with the possibility that his world is fictional, refusing to take seriously the very real evidence that Rob keeps presenting. So, when Superintendent Evil appears and starts doing genuinely alarming things to the students, erasing Terry's face, forcing Alan to have a physical body, stripping away the cartoonishness that the characters have always considered simply their nature, Gumball fights back. Because of course he does. Gumball wins. Rob's plan fails. And then the Void arrives anyway. Rob stands alone in the hallway of Elmore Junior High as the ground opens beneath him. He looks at Gumball. He does not say anything that sounds like "I told you so," because Rob, despite everything, despite all of it, is not that kind of person. He looks at Gumball, and then he looks at the Void, and he says, "Oh no, it has started." And then he falls. For years, that was the last image of the amazing world of Gumball. A freeze frame of Rob falling into the Void, screaming. Credits playing. The screen going dark. The revival series resolved this. Rob was saved from the Void by the van shopkeeper, who gave him a new purpose, a new identity, a new reason to exist. Not the villain, not the background character, not the prophet that nobody listened to. The Guardian. The person who knows what is coming and has accepted that his role is to stand between everyone else and the oblivion they cannot see. He chose, in the rewrite, to fall back into the Void to prevent Gumball and Darwin from discovering the fictional nature of their world. Because that discovery would trigger the Void's return. He sacrificed himself again for people who would never know what he sacrificed. He became a hero by becoming invisible again. He gave up his need to be seen in order to protect the people he had always wanted to be seen by. The full arc of Rob, from background nothing to erased nobody to constructed villain, to ignored prophet, to forgotten guardian, is one of the most complete and emotionally coherent character journeys in the history of animation. It is built on a foundation of genuine philosophical weight. It is executed with consistency and care across 6 full seasons. And it ends with the character achieving exactly the opposite of what he originally wanted. Not recognition, not a plush toy, not a spin-off, just the knowledge, held alone in the dark, that because of what he did, the people he loved continue to exist. Section 8. The Dark Philosophy of Elmore. What the show is really about, Gumball, is a children's show about a blue cat who goes to middle school. That sentence is true. It is also, as anyone who has spent real time with the show understands, almost laughably inadequate. The show operates on at least 3 distinct levels simultaneously. There is the surface level, the comedy, the slapstick, the absurdist scenarios, the pop culture references, the genuinely funny physical gags. This is the level that most children experience, and that is more than sufficient for the show to function as entertainment. Then there is the character level, the surprisingly nuanced emotional lives of the characters, the family dynamics that mirror real family dynamics in the way a funhouse mirror mirrors a face, distorted but recognizable. And then there is the philosophical level, which is where things get genuinely strange. At its philosophical core, The Amazing World of Gumball is a show about the conditional nature of existence. It asks, through the language of cartoon comedy, a question that is not actually comedic at all. What makes a life worth living if the right to live that life can be revoked? The Void makes this question literal. In Elmore, your existence depends on your continued relevance to the story being told about you. If you stop being interesting, you are removed. If you stop being useful, you are erased. If you are too ordinary, too quiet, too content with just existing without drama, the universe may decide you are a mistake and send you somewhere the rest of the world will never think to look for you. This is obviously a direct metaphor for the experience of being a piece of media in a commercial marketplace. Characters exist because someone pays for them to exist. Shows run because enough people watch them. The moment the numbers drop below a threshold, the show ends, and the characters, who were as real to their audience as any real person, simply stop. They do not age, they do not retire. They are just not there anymore. But the show extends this metaphor to something that applies beyond the world of media. Because the fear that the void represents, the fear of being deemed not interesting enough, not useful enough, not worthy enough to continue, is not a fear that only fictional characters feel. Think about the social anxiety of adolescence, the specific terror of being at the age where your peer group's opinion of you can feel like it determines your entire reality. Think about the professional anxiety of being in a job where your continued employment depends on your continued performance. Think about the existential anxiety of being a person in a world that seems to reward certain kinds of people with visibility and care and significance, and to ignore others completely. Rob's experience of being a background character who nobody bothers to rescue is not exclusively a fiction. There are people who feel exactly that way. There are people for whom the void is not a metaphorical extra dimension on a cartoon, but a very accurate description of how invisible they feel in their own lives. The show is too smart to claim that its dark theories are simple allegories. It never breaks character to explain what it is doing. It just does it, and trusts the audience to meet it wherever they are. The episode The Joy is, by common consensus, the show's finest horror episode and one of the most audacious things Cartoon Network ever permitted to air. It begins on a Monday morning. Richard gives Gumball and Darwin what he calls a wonder hug. A rainbow mushroom explosion follows, and Gumball and Darwin arrive at school with fixed, unblinking, wall-to-wall smiles that immediately alarm Miss Simeon when she watches the security cameras. What follows is 11 minutes of meticulously constructed survival horror. The joy virus spreads through the school. Infected characters develop the compulsion to hug uninfected characters to pass it on. Their eyes go wide and dilated. Their smiles are fixed and permanent. They drool rainbow fluid and shuffle toward their targets with the shambling, purposeful gait of something you would recognize from about 100 horror films. The show references Resident Evil, 28 Days Later, Quarantine, Diary of the Dead, Cloverfield, and Left 4 Dead, and does so with genuine commitment. The security camera timestamps are real. The found footage aesthetic is maintained. The horror works. But the horror is not just aesthetic. The horror is conceptual. The joy virus turns happiness into a disease. It takes the one thing everyone should want, joy, connection, love, and reveals what it becomes when it is mandatory rather than genuine. When you are not allowed to feel anything other than happy, happiness becomes its own kind of prison. The infected characters retain some fragments of their personalities. Gumball, as a hugger, still gravitates toward Penny rather than other targets, suggesting his feelings for her persist even through the virus. But they are not themselves. Their identity has been replaced by a directive. The cure is sadness. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the most beautiful expression of grief that Western classical music has produced. In Elmore, the only defense against forced happiness is the permission to feel genuinely sad. Miss Simeon's sequence navigating the infected hallways remains one of the show's great comic achievements. She disguises herself as infected, walking with outstretched arms and a forced smile, pretending to be a hugger. She is making it. She is almost at the office. And then she sees Banana Joe with his peel unzipped. A dress code violation, and she cannot stop herself. 2 million years of teaching instinct override every survival impulse she has. She reaches out and zips up his peel, and they see her. Her final recording on Principal Brown's camcorder as the virus takes her is a masterpiece of comedic timing. The face of someone who has been at their post for 2 million years, finally, completely, irreversibly relieved of the burden of having to maintain any standards at all. The episode ends, and the show never mentions it again. In the next episode, everyone is fine. The virus is gone. The horror did not happen. The reset wiped it clean. Which is, in some ways, the darkest thing about it. Section 9, Behind the Scenes. Production secrets and hidden trivia. There is a world of small, strange, wonderful details about how Gumball was made that most viewers never encounter, and they are worth surfacing because they add a whole additional layer of appreciation to what you are watching. Ben Bocquelet does the voice of Sussy's wailing, screaming, and laughter. The character, who is literally a live-action chin with googly eyes, the most alien figure in all of Elmore, makes her most unsettling sounds with the voice of the show's own creator. Additionally, Bocquelet also voices the sneezes of the drum kit guy, a minor recurring background character. He is in the show, literally, as Noise. Sussy's chin is real. The character is portrayed by Bocquelet's girlfriend, who in later seasons also voiced Sussy's dialogue. The bizarre, irreducible strangeness of the character, the fact that she is quite literally a piece of a human body inserted into an animated world, is not the result of a design team brainstorming the most unusual character concept they could imagine. It is the result of Ben Bocquelet deciding to put his girlfriend in the show in the most peculiar way possible. The surrealism is personal. Banana Joe's Mike Graves, the show's series director, voices Banana Joe. This means the person responsible for the overall visual language of the show is also the person making the noises of one of its most ridiculous characters. Graves was with Bocquelet at Studio AKA and was recruited to direct Gumball from the very beginning. He has described the show's visual philosophy as being about prioritizing writing and storyboarding above everything else, which is why episodes can look radically different from week to week without losing their identity. The consistency is not aesthetic. It is structural. It is about the rhythm of the jokes and the logic of the stories. The turtle that Gumball and Darwin mistreat in the episode The Puppy, the one that withers under the sun when Darwin leaves it outside, died in the way it died because Ben Bocquelet's own pet turtle died in exactly the same circumstances when he was a child. The show was extremely good at finding the specific, real human pain inside its comedy and making that the foundation of the joke rather than dressing the joke put on top of it. The treasure hunt that Gumball makes for Penny in The Romantic, an elaborate, multi-stage quest that takes her through various locations in Elmore, is based on a treasure hunt that one of the show's writers created for their real-life girlfriend. The episode The Slip, which involves the Wattersons receiving 2 televisions with broken screens and then being shipped an increasingly absurd series of replacements, was based on an actual experience one of the writers had with Amazon deliveries. These real-world origins are scattered throughout the show's history, quietly confirming Bocquelet's statement in early interviews that the show's method was to take real things that had happened to him, his family, or his team and then blow them out of proportion across 3 acts. The comedy is real. The specificity of the comedy is real. The reason Elmore feels like somewhere a person actually lived is that it is somewhere a person actually lived, just with the proportions adjusted and the neighbors replaced with a banana and a T-Rex. Teresa Gallagher voices Nicole, Penny, Mrs. Robinson, Terry, Jackie, and somewhere between 10 and 12 other named characters over the course of the show's run. Each character sounds completely distinct from every other. This is an extraordinary sustained performance that tends to go unremarked upon precisely because it is so seamlessly effective. She is also, in real life, a singer, which is why Nicole's musical moments, the ones where she gets to actually sing, have an unusual power and warmth. Carrie Shale voices Larry Needlemeyer, Leslie, Alan Keene, and Hector, among others. Hugo Harold Harrison voices Tobias Wilson and Alan Keene from Season 2 onward. Dan Russell voices Richard, Patrick Fitzgerald, Coach, Tina Rex, and a rotating roster of supporting characters. The small core of British voice actors who populated Elmore built a show that ran for 6 seasons, 240 episodes of the main series, 2 miniseries, and an entire revival. With the same voices, the same characters, the same world, sustained over nearly a decade. The villain version of Rob was voiced for a period by David Warner, the late British character actor whose voice was so perfectly calibrated for classical villainy that casting him as Gumball's nemesis was a joke with enormous comedic depth. Warner brought genuine gravitas to the role of a Cyclops who was desperately performing a villainy he did not believe in. The contrast between the theatrical weight of Warner's delivery and the fundamental sadness of Rob's situation was part of what made those episodes work so well. Every episode of the show is titled The Something, with only 2 exceptions: the holiday specials Halloween and Christmas, which do not follow the naming convention. In Japan, the episode titles were changed to formats more typical of anime naming conventions, which is a small cross-cultural detail that would have amused the show's creative team enormously, given how deeply the show was already in dialogue with anime as a visual tradition. Boom! Studios published a comic book series based on the show beginning in June 2014. It was written by Frank Gibson and illustrated by Tyson Hesse, ran for 8 issues, and was accompanied by 8 original graphic novels. The show was also represented in the Cartoon Network crossover video game Battle Crashers. The mobile game Agent Gumball reached the #1 overall position in the iTunes charts on iPad in 5 countries at launch, and reached the #1 position in the kids category in 27 countries. At its peak, Gumball was reaching 165 million viewers globally per quarter. It was the #1 rated show on Cartoon Network worldwide. By the time the original series ended, it had accumulated 38 award wins, including an International Emmy, 9 BAFTA Children's Awards, 6 British Animation Awards, 3 Annie Awards, and honors from the Annecy International Animated Film Festival. The International Emmy was won at the very first International Emmy Kids Awards ceremony in February 2013, where Gumball won the animation category. The show became the first animated series produced by the newly formed Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe to win that award. It did this in its 2nd year of existence. Gumball was consistently among the highest-rated animated shows on IMDb, with an average episode rating of approximately 8 out of 10 and an overall series score of 8.4, placing it in the company of shows like Gravity Falls, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and Futurama. And it takes roughly 1 year to produce an episode. 1 year. 26 in production simultaneously. Multiple studios across 3 countries. Multiple software platforms. Multiple completely different visual styles within the same 11-minute piece. Somehow, across 6 seasons and 240 episodes, the machine never broke. Section 10. The best episodes ever made. A deep dive into 5 masterpieces. Not every episode of Gumball is a masterpiece. The show had an extraordinary run, but like any long-running animated series, it had its peaks and its valleys. What separates the peaks from everything else is not just the quality of the comedy or the inventiveness of the visual approach. It is the degree to which the episode manages to do several completely different things simultaneously and makes all of them land. The Choices, Season 5, Episode 5. This is the one. If someone asks you which single episode of Gumball they should watch to understand what the show is capable of at its very best, This is the answer. During a disastrous family dinner, Nicole's mind drifts, and she begins to think about the series of decisions that led her to this exact point in her life. The episode becomes a love story, a character study, and a quietly devastating portrait of parenthood, told almost entirely through a series of what-if scenarios that explore the alternate paths Nicole might have taken if she had made different choices. If she had stayed with her karate training and gone competitive. If she had married Harold, a different boy she knew. If she had chosen ambition over love. The alternate timelines are played with comedy but also with genuine emotional specificity. The timeline in which she marries Harold ends with her setting the house on fire because he complained about her cooking, which is both hilarious and, if you read it as a portrait of what domestic misery looks like when you chose the wrong person, genuinely sad. The timeline in which she became a great karate champion ends with her as a lonely, isolated figure, decorated with trophies but empty of everything she actually values. There is a section in the middle of the episode where the show abandons dialogue entirely and shows Richard and Nicole's entire life together, meeting, falling in love, getting married, having Gumball, adopting Darwin, having Anais, in a time-lapse montage set entirely to music without a single word spoken. It is among the most affecting pieces of pure visual storytelling in any animated series. And it would be remarkable even in a show that was not also, in the same episode, making jokes about Harold being confused by sushi. The episode ends with Nicole choosing her family. Not despite everything, not despite the chaos and the exhaustion and the property damage and the bills, but because of it. Because this specific, particular, irreplaceable mess is the life she built, and it is the life she wanted, and it is the one she would choose again. The final shot, Nicole starting a food fight at the dinner table while her family looks on in delighted disbelief, is one of the great final images in the show's history. The Shell, Season 3, Episode 20. Covered extensively in the character section, but worth returning to here for a moment. The Shell is the episode that permanently altered the status quo of the show. Prior to it, Gumball and Penny's relationship was a slow burn, mutually acknowledged, but never consummated crush. After it, they are a couple. They are changed. The show committed to the change and did not reset it. This matters because Gumball, as a largely episodic show with a strong reset mechanism, almost never commits to permanent change in the way that the Shell committed to it. The decision to let Penny break out of her shell and stay out, to let the relationship actually begin, to let the status quo genuinely shift, was a creative risk. It paid off every subsequent time the show revisited the relationship, which was richer, more interesting, and more emotionally resonant for being a real relationship, rather than a perpetual almost. The episode has a 9.4 rating on IMDb. It won the British Animation Award for Best Children's Series. It is the episode most frequently cited by fans as the moment they realized this show was something different. And the central image of it, Gumball looking at Penny in whatever monstrous form her self-doubt has created, and choosing not to flinch, choosing to stay, choosing to tell her she is beautiful, not in spite of what she is, but as what she is genuinely one of the great romantic moments in animation. The Joy, Season 3, Episode 4. The Zombie episode, the horror episode, the episode that is genuinely, impressively frightening in ways that a children's cartoon on Cartoon Network should probably not be, and yet indisputably is. Already covered in the philosophical section, but it deserves a moment here for its pure craft. The structural decision to film the episode as found footage, with security camera timestamps and degraded image quality and the aesthetic of survival horror, is bold and completely committed. There is no winking at the audience. The show does not signal that this is funny, that you should be laughing, that it is all okay. It plays the horror straight, and the comedy emerges from the horror rather than in spite of it. Miss Simeon's sequence through the infected hallways is the episode's peak, and it works because the tension of the zombie horror has been built genuinely enough that her eventual failure, caused by professional habit overriding survival instinct, lands as both funny and real. The episode also ends without resolution. The virus wins. The world resets. The show moves on. No explanation, no aftermath, no reassurance. Just the next episode, as though the joy had never happened. That choice is its own statement about the nature of the Gumball universe's relationship to consequence. The choices and the disaster and the rerun together function as a kind of thematic triptych. The choices is about why the Watterson family exists at all, the love that built it, the choices that made it. The disaster and the rerun are about what would happen if that existence were manipulated by someone with a remote control and enough anger to use it. Rob's use of the universal remote in the disaster to rewind Gumball's life, to undo his friendship, to erase his relationship with Penny, to kill Darwin and watch Gumball's reaction. It is cruel in the specific, targeted way of someone who knows exactly where to press to cause the most pain. Because Rob is not just the villain in this episode, he is the mirror. He is showing Gumball what it feels like to have your reality managed by someone else, to have your choices taken away, to have the most important things in your life treated as variables to be adjusted by another party's preferences. The rerun is the episode that resolves it, and the resolution is heartbreaking. Gumball reaches out to Rob, genuinely, without strategy, out of actual guilt and actual empathy. He tries to help. And Rob, seeing this, understanding that Gumball is offering something real, uses the remote one final time to undo everything, including the reconciliation. He erases the only moment of genuine human connection he has experienced in the entire run of the show in order to prevent the damage he caused from being permanent. Nobody knows what he gave up. The episode The Inquisition, the original series finale, functions as a masterpiece of dark comedy and genuine dramatic tension. Rob's infiltration of the school, his live-action human form walking through corridors of cartoon characters, the gradual erasure of the students' cartoon natures as they are transformed into increasingly realistic humans. All of this builds to a final sequence that is legitimately, uncomfortably tense. And then the freeze frame of Rob falling into the void, with the credit music playing and the words "to be continued" that were not honored for 6 years. Watching it now, knowing how it was resolved, it hits differently. It is still sad. It is still a portrait of someone who tried everything and was too late. But the tragedy has a context now, and the context is that Rob came back. Rob was saved. Rob got a different ending than the one that looked inevitable. Section 11. The Legacy, the Revival, and Where Gumball Goes From Here. In September 2016, Ben Bockley announced that he was departing the amazing world of Gumball after the completion of Season 6. He described it as the natural endpoint of the story he had wanted to tell. Production would continue. Cartoon Network had committed to a 6th season and intended to see it through. But Bockley was stepping back from his role as creative director and principal showrunner. The fan community did not take this calmly. Gumball had accumulated a following that was, by that point, enormous, fiercely devoted, and extremely vocal across social media. The prospect of the show continuing without its creator was not one that most fans found reassuring. Season 6 aired and ended in June 2019 with The Inquisition. The cliffhanger that ended the series was not, according to Bockley's later statements, his intended conclusion. He had planned a film to resolve it. The cliffhanger was a creative choice made in anticipation of that film providing closure. When the film's production became complicated, when HBO Max canceled the project in August 2022 after the restructuring of the company under new management, the cliffhanger became simply an unresolved ending. 2 miniseries followed to keep the franchise alive. Darwin's Yearbook, a 6-episode series focusing on various classmates of Elmore Junior High, premiered in December 2019. The Gumball Chronicles, an 8-episode collection primarily using clips from existing episodes with some new framing material, premiered in October 2020. In November 2020, 4 special election-themed episodes titled Vote Gumball aired in quick succession. They were written and directed by Richard Overall, the show's voice director, and are the only Gumball episodes not written by Bockley or his core team. At the 2023 Annecy International Animation Film Festival, the existence of a 7th season was officially confirmed, with Bockley returning as creator and executive producer. At the 2024 festival, it was confirmed that the season was in full production, and a preview of the opening episode called The Burger was screened for attendees. In May 2025, it was announced that the seventh season would be retitled The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball. The name change reflected a creative decision to present the revival as something fresh, something that acknowledged the time that had passed, and the changes that had occurred, rather than pretending the world had simply continued exactly as it was. The casting changed. Gumball is now voiced by Elkayo Thiele, who previously voiced Spider-Man in Spidey and His Amazing Friends. Darwin is voiced by Hero Hunter. Aeneas is voiced by Kinza Syed Khan. Teresa Gallagher returns as Nicole and Penny, and Dan Russell returns as Richard, providing continuity between the old series and the new. The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball premiered on Hulu on July 28, 2025. The first batch of 20 episodes was released on that date. The second batch of 20 episodes, branded as Season 2 by Hulu despite comprising the back half of the same 40-episode production order, premiered on December 22, 2025. In December 2025, another 40-episode order was confirmed, constituting what the original show's structure would call Seasons 8 through 9, divided into what the Hulu rebrand calls Seasons 3 and 4 of the revival. The machine is running again, and it is running at speed. The revival storyline engaged directly with the unresolved threads of the original series. The Void, the movie that never happens intended subject matter, was addressed within the first season of the revival. The episode The Rewrite resolved Rob's arc, answered the questions about the Void's true nature, and gave the story the ending that the original series finale had promised but been unable to deliver. Bocquelet confirmed in a December 2025 interview with the Cartoon Network France YouTube channel that the film is still being considered, with a new creative angle being explored, and the project in discussion about re-greenlighting. Season 8 is already in order, and the 300th episode is on the horizon, which Bocquelet has said he is planning something special for. The show that began as the first full-length animated series produced by Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe is now, 14 years after its premiere, still running, still evolving, still finding new things to say about the Watterson family and the extraordinary broken world they inhabit. The franchise has accumulated over 38 award wins. It aired in over 160 countries. It generated millions of app downloads and hundreds of millions of social media interactions. It produced 240 episodes of the main series, 2 miniseries, and now a revival that has already delivered 40 more episodes with 80 more on the way. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, Ben Bocquelet made a show about a blue cat who goes to middle school that quietly asked whether your right to exist depends on whether you are interesting enough to be worth keeping. There are people who first watched Gumball as children and are now adults. There are people who grew up with Gumball in the same way people grew up with The Simpsons or Rugrats or Avatar, with the specific, irreplaceable intimacy of a piece of art that you encountered at the exact right moment in your development for it to become part of how you see the world. For those people, the revival is not just a new season of a television show. It is a return to a place they did not quite know they missed until they were back in it. Elmore still exists. Gumball and Darwin are still in school. Nicole is still holding everything together through sheer force of will. Richard is still on the couch. Aeneas is still the smartest person in every room and still completely unable to make a friend without driving them away. The Void is still out there, but Rob is out there too, watching, protecting, being the guardian that nobody knows they have. Section 12, Part A. The small things, facts, details, and hidden treasures from across all 6 seasons. There is a particular pleasure in rewatching a show you love and suddenly seeing something you have never noticed before. A detail in the background, a line that lands differently now that you know what comes later. A visual joke buried so deep in a busy frame that the animators who put it there probably assumed nobody would ever catch it. Gumball is full of these moments. It is a show that rewards close attention with the generosity of a creator who genuinely enjoys hiding things. Ben Bocquelet does the voice of Susie's wailing, screaming, and laughter in the original series. The most inhuman-sounding character in Elmore, the character who is literally a live-action chin with googly eyes, who makes sounds that no cartoon character should ever make, makes those sounds with the voice of the show's own creator. He also voices the sneezes of the drum kit guy, a background character who appears in crowd scenes and whose sneezes are the only thing he is really known for producing. Bacalé is in the show, literally, as noise. Susie's physical form, the live-action upside-down chin, is portrayed by Bacalé's girlfriend, who also voiced Susie's dialogue in the later seasons. The character is, in other words, a collaboration between the show's creator and his partner, expressed as the most visually strange thing in any frame she appears in. The surrealism is personal, the strangeness is deliberate, and the fact that nobody involved thought this was anything other than obviously the right creative decision tells you something important about the atmosphere in which the show was made. The episode The Recipe is the one that explicitly confirms the mechanism behind Anton the Toast's resurrection. Darwin and Banana Joe discover that the same toaster that revives Anton after his repeated deaths can also create multiple copies of him simultaneously. The episode confirms that Anton's survival is not healing, but replication. A new Anton is created. The old one is simply gone. The philosophical implications of this, the question of whether the new Anton is the same Anton, whether the continuity of identity persists through replication, whether any of the previous Anton's experiences or feelings carry through to their replacement, are not addressed. The show plays it for comedy, but the comedy is sitting on top of a genuine philosophical problem about personal identity that has occupied thinkers from Theseus onward. The Watterson's last name is confirmed in the show to be a deliberate reference to Bill Watterson, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes. This is not an allusion buried in background text or a subtle nod that requires research to identify. Ben Bacalé stated it directly in interviews. He named his fictional family after a man whose approach to creative work, the insistence on integrity over commercial pressure, the willingness to end the thing when it was done rather than perpetuate it past its natural end, represented a standard he was trying in his own way to hold himself to. The treasure world hunt that Gumball makes for Penny in the episode The Romantic is based on a real-world treasure hunt that one of the show's writers created for their actual girlfriend. The show was consistently grounded in real experience, real emotion, real specific instances of things that had happened to the people making it. This grounding is part of why the comedy lands as well as it does. Comedy that comes from real life has a texture that pure invention rarely achieves. The turtle's fate in The Puppy, the baby turtle that withers when Darwin inadvertently leaves it in the sun, reflects the real death of Ben Bacalé's own childhood pet turtle, which died in almost exactly the same circumstances. The show was made partly as a way of processing real loss and real experience through the filter of comedy, and the turtle is one of the clearest examples of that process. Rob's villain voice, the theatrical, classically trained British voice that Rob adopts during his Nemesis period, was provided by David Warner, one of Britain's most respected character actors. Warner had appeared in Time Bandits, The Omen, Tron, and dozens of other major productions over a decades-long career. His contributions to the show gave Rob's constructed villainy a weight and dignity that the character desperately needed. Because the joke of Rob only works if the performance behind it takes itself seriously. Warner understood exactly what kind of role this was and played it accordingly. He died in July 2022, and the Gumball community mourned him specifically for the depth he had brought to a character who could have been merely comic, but became, under his voice, genuinely moving. Teresa Gallagher voices somewhere between 10 and 12 named characters across the show's run, each with a completely distinct vocal identity. She is Nicole's stressed urgency, Penny's careful warmth, Terry's hypochondriac precision, Mrs. Robinson's pinched disapproval, and several other personalities that require very different qualities of performance while remaining recognizably produced by the same throat. As a professional singer outside of her work on the show, Gallagher brings genuine musical capability to every moment where her characters are required to sing. And the difference between those moments and the moments where voice actors who are not primarily singers attempt the same thing is genuinely audible. The episode The Choices and the episode The Heart function as companion pieces in a way that rewards watching them close together. The choices establishes the emotional foundation of the Watterson family. Why Nicole made the choice she made, what it cost her, why she would make it again. The heart establishes that even the seemingly unredeemable characters in Elmore's social ecology, specifically Gaylord Robinson, whose grumpiness towards the Wattersons has been an unbroken wall across 6 seasons, have an interior life that the show is capable of reaching. Robinson's eventual softening in the heart is earned precisely because the show has spent so long establishing how hard that wall is. The episode The Money is the show at its most structurally experimental in terms of what it says about its own existence. As the Wattersons' bank account depletes, the show itself deteriorates. The animation becomes cheaper. Product placements Bamaki intrude into conversations. Characters deliver endorsements mid-sentence. The visual quality drops. The show is not just commenting on the commercial reality of television production. It is making that reality a plot point, collapsing the distance between the fiction and the economics that sustain it, treating the show's own commercial viability as a story element rather than a behind-the-scenes concern. The episode The Signal is similar in its structural ambition. Reality glitches because the broadcast is degrading. The show is not depicting characters in a world where something went wrong. The show itself appears to malfunction. Gumball notices. He is disturbed and frustrated, not existentially terrified, which is somehow more disturbing than terror would be. It suggests that the signal has always been fragile, that the characters have always been one bad connection away from dissolution, and that they have been living at that edge so long that they have become accustomed to it. Banana Barbara's paintings, which were background details in the Banana family's home in the show's early seasons, retroactively become prophetic objects once the Oracle establishes her abilities explicitly. The show did not retroactively place the paintings in early episodes. They were always there, waiting to become meaningful. Whether the production team planned this from the beginning or simply found that their already established background details could serve a new purpose is not entirely clear, but the effect is the same. Rewatching the early episodes, the paintings in the background of Banana Joe's house take on a weight that they were not carrying on first viewing. The crossover episode The Puppets is genuinely uncomfortable in the specific way that Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is uncomfortable. It uses cheerful surfaces to deliver unsettling content, and it does not quite resolve the unsettlement before the episode ends. The felt puppets created by Becky Sloan and Joe Pelling appear as actual physical objects in the episode, which is consistent with the show's visual philosophy that characters from different media can coexist in the same space. But the specific message the puppets deliver to Darwin, that he is not really alive, that he is just a character in a show, is not delivered as a joke. It is delivered as a threat, and Darwin's response is not comedy, it is terror. The episode The Copycats responded to real-world plagiarism with a level of creative confidence that was remarkable. Rather than ignoring the miracle star situation, the show built an episode around it, inserted the plagiarized characters directly, acknowledged the plagiarism explicitly within the fiction, and then let Gumball's fury at encountering copies of himself do the emotional work that a formal legal response would have done differently. The episode ends with the copies literally self-destructing, which is not a subtle metaphor. The recurring figure of the van shopkeeper, confirmed in the revival as the entity that saved Rob from the void, is retroactively one of the most significant characters in the show's mythology. Every item he sold that caused case, the evil turtle, the universal remote, the various other plot devices that drove episodes forward, might have been placed deliberately with purpose by a figure who understood Elmore's narrative needs better than anyone inside it. He does not sell products, he services the story. The episode The Others is the first time the show directly confronts the existence of narratives that do not involve Gumball. Claire Cooper, the character Gumball follows through her day, has a complete emotional life and a full set of problems that are entirely her own. Gumball's discomfort, his instinct to center himself in her story, his eventual humbling, this is the show being extremely precise about a specific kind of emotional immaturity, the inability to comprehend that other people's lives are as real and as complete as your own. Miss Simeon's sequence in The Joy, disguising herself as infected to survive the zombie apocalypse, moving through corridors of happiness zombies until her professional instinct overrides her survival instinct, and she zips up Banana Joe's peel, is the most perfectly distilled version of her character that the show ever produced. She is doomed not by external circumstances, but by who she has been for 2 million years. The universe cannot change her. The joy virus cannot change her. She will enforce the dress code until the moment reality stops existing, because that is who she is and that is what she does. It is comedy. It is also the most honest portrait of how deeply embedded professional identity can be. The full name of the town is Elmore, California, and it is located somewhere in the American West. But the photographic backgrounds on which the show's aesthetic is built are drawn primarily from London and its surroundings, which means that Elmore is simultaneously an American suburb and a British city. The geography is always slightly wrong if you try to map it onto either location specifically. It is both, and neither. It exists in the overlap. The show ran for 240 main series episodes across 6 seasons, plus 2 miniseries with a combined total of 14 additional episodes. The Gumball Chronicles was primarily a clip show with some new framing material. Darwin's Yearbook featured 6 episodes focused on secondary characters. Together, these extended the show's total episode count to 254 before the revival began, adding new episodes at a rate of 40 per production cycle. The revival, The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, premiered with Gumball and Darwin waking up in a ruined, abandoned version of their house after having been asleep for 7 years, which is approximately how long the gap between the original finale and the revival's premiere actually was. The show acknowledged the absence directly, making the 7-year gap part of the story rather than trying to pretend it had not happened. Alkio Thiele, the new voice of Gumball in the revival, had previously voiced Spider-Man in Spidey and His Amazing Friends, which is a genuinely interesting piece of career trajectory. From the most famous superhero in American popular culture to a 12-year-old blue cat who cannot stop causing problems in a fictional California suburb. Season 8 of the revival was ordered in December 2025, 4 days before the second batch of the revival's first season premiered on Hulu, making it the fastest greenlight between seasons in the franchise's history. The total number of episodes ordered for the franchise across all seasons now comfortably exceeds 300. The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball. Season 2 on Hulu featured, among its storylines, a disastrous promposal in which Penny fakes her own death, which is both a very specific kind of comedy and in the context of a relationship that began in an episode about a girl breaking out of a shell that was protecting her from the world, a genuinely interesting escalation. The show's IMDb rating of 8.4 out of 10, with 94% of user ratings being positive, places it in the company of the most beloved animated series ever made. Its average individual episode rating of approximately 8 out of 10 is extraordinary for a show that produced 240 episodes across 6 seasons. Most series see their per-episode ratings degrade as the run extends, but Gumball maintained remarkable consistency in its quality assessment by audiences. Section 12, Part B. The musical DNA of Elmore and the sonic world Ben Bacalette built. The Amazing World of Gumball is not usually discussed as a musical show in the same category as Steven Universe or Phineas and Ferb, but it produced a genuinely surprising number of memorable songs across its run. And those songs range from clever comedy pieces to genuinely affecting pieces of storytelling. The show's primary composer for the original 6 seasons was Ben Lockett, whose scoring of the show established a sonic identity for Elmore that is as specific and recognizable as its visual identity. Lockett's approach was to use music that sounded slightly too optimistic for the situations it was scoring, which created a persistent tonal gap between the surface cheerfulness and the darker territory the show was actually exploring. The comedy sequences get bouncy, elastic, percussion-forward scores. The character moments get something quieter and more careful. And in the episodes where the show reaches for genuine emotion, the choices, the shell, the origins, the music opens up into something that carries the scene rather than decorating it. In The Choices, the time-lapse montage of Richard and Nicole's life together is scored entirely without dialogue, relying on the music to carry the emotional weight of decades compressed into minutes. The score there is one of the show's finest achievements, managing to be simultaneously funny and genuinely moving, sweet and aware of the cost of the choices being depicted. The episode The Fury, with its extended anime-style battle sequence animated by Studio 4 Degrees Celsius, required a completely different sonic approach. The score for that sequence is built from the aesthetic language of 1980s Japanese anime soundtracks, all driving synthesizer lines and punchy percussion, and the commitment to that aesthetic choice is total. The music shifts the episode into a different register the moment the fight begins and returns to normal. Elmore scoring when it ends, which is exactly the right decision. Teresa Gallagher's singing capabilities are deployed across multiple episodes, most extensively in The Compilation and The Fuss, where Nicole gets extended musical moments that showcase what the character sounds like when the pressure valve is allowed to fully open. Her voice in those moments is the sound of Nicole Watterson getting to be something other than a wall of competence and barely suppressed rage, and it is genuinely beautiful. The Without You sequence in The Matchmaker, performed by Danielle T. Hansley Jr. As Darwin occupies an unusual emotional space, a comedy show's musical number performed with enough sincerity to briefly become not quite a comedy show's musical number. The feeling in that performance is real, and the show's willingness to let it be real, rather than undercutting it with a joke, is representative of how Gumball treated its most important emotional moments. The theme song itself is brief enough to feel almost too short, which is exactly the right choice. It does not want to explain. It wants to create a mood. And the mood it creates, bright, slightly rushed, affectionate, and a little chaotic, is the perfect preparation for whatever Elmore has planned for the next 11 minutes. Section 12. Part C. The Legacy of Connections. How everything in Elmore points back to everything else. The amazing world of Gumball rewards sustained attention with what might be the most consistent internal mythology of any animated children's show in Cartoon Network history. The connections between episodes, between seasons, between throwaway details and major plot points, between early background gags and late-season revelations, form a web of meaning that grows richer the longer you spend inside it. The Void was introduced as a concept in Season 3. By Season 6, it had become the show's central existential threat, the thing the entire final arc was building toward. But between Seasons 3 and 6, the Void was not absent from the show. It was present in glances, in background details, in the specific quality of static that sometimes appeared in the edges of frames, in the paintings in Banana Barbara's garage that were always visible but not always legible. The van shopkeeper was present from the beginning as a minor gag. By the revival, he was confirmed as one of the most significant figures in the show's mythology. The items he sold, the evil turtle, the universal remote, the goldfish that became Darwin, were not random plot devices. They were placements, interventions, story maintenance. Rob was a background extra for 2 seasons. By the finale, he was the character who understood more about the true nature of Elmore than anyone else in it. His arc required the patience of the audience and the patience of the writers. They let him be invisible for 2 full seasons before revealing that his invisibility was the point, that he had always been there and always been aware and always been the one the show was quietly building toward. Penny was a peanut for 3 seasons. She was always a fairy. She was always the person who would eventually show Gumball what it looks like to choose visibility over safety. Her arc required the patience of not rushing, of letting the mystery accumulate before the revelation. Nicole's traumatic upbringing was present in her behavior from the very first episode, but not explicitly addressed until Season 5. The 5 seasons of watching her be someone whose competence and rage seemed excessive, and then the Season 5 episode that explained exactly why those qualities were not excessive at all, but were in fact the minimum viable response to the specific childhood she had survived. That sequence is one of the show's great structural achievements. Darwin began the show as a goldfish who could talk and had legs and was Gumball's best friend. He ended the original series having never fully resolved the question of whether his personality was his own or installed. The revival is still exploring that question, which is the right decision. Some questions are better kept open. Ben Bockley spent years making characters nobody wanted. He gathered them up, he gave them a world, He made that world out of photographs of London streets and called it California. He named the family after his own family and after a man whose approach to creative integrity he admired. He made the show about the terror of not being wanted and the love that fights against that terror every single day. The show ran for 6 seasons. It won 38 awards. It reached hundreds of millions of viewers worldwide. It produced one of the most complete villain-to-hero arcs in animation history, built around a character who was introduced as a background extra. It produced an episode about zombie happiness that is genuinely frightening. It produced a love story that begins with a shell and ends with a girl who glows. It produced a portrait of a family whose love for each other is so obvious and so reliable that even the worst days in Elmore feel survivable. And it did all of this while being, on the surface, a show about a blue cat who cannot stop causing problems. Section 12. Closing. Why Gumball matters and what it tells us about the stories we keep. There is a French and British animator who, in the early part of the century, spent years creating characters that nobody wanted. He made them for advertising pitches that got rejected. He put care into them and then watched them go into a drawer. And somewhere in that experience, in the accumulation of those rejections, he developed a philosophy about fictional existence that would eventually become the most philosophically ambitious children's show Cartoon Network ever produced. He gathered up the rejects. He gave them a world. He named that world after the specific quality of the backgrounds he used to make it feel real. He named the family after his own family because the characters were real to him and he wanted them to carry something true. He named the family's surname after a man who had made something transcendent and then let it end rather than let it be diminished. And he put them all inside a story about what it costs to exist in a world that might not decide to keep you. Ben Bocquelet made a show that is, beneath its bright colors and its slapstick and its extraordinary visual inventiveness, a show about love. About the specific, stubborn, irrational kind of love that says, I see what you are, I know it is complicated. I know it is sometimes terrifying, and sometimes infuriating, and sometimes impossible, and I am not going anywhere. Nicole chose that love over her parents' expectations, and paid a price and chose it again anyway. Darwin walked across an entire city on legs he had never used before, through a world that was not built for him, because the alternative was being separated from the person he loved, and that was not an alternative he was capable of accepting. Penny broke out of her shell because one boy looked at the most frightening version of her and said, without hesitation, without performance, I like you. Rob sacrificed his only chance at being seen in order to protect people who would never know what he had given up. The dark theories are real. The void is real. The static at the edge of everything is real. But so is what these characters do in the face of all of that. They choose each other. They show up. They keep going. There is a reason that people watch Gumball at 2 in the morning when the room is too quiet and the inside of their head is too loud. It is not just the comedy, though the comedy is world-class. It is not just the philosophy, though the philosophy is more rigorous and more honest than most adult television gets to be. It is the specific feeling the show creates, the sense that somebody somewhere understood that the world is genuinely strange and genuinely frightening, and genuinely, at its core, a place where your right to continue is never completely guaranteed, and decided to respond to that by making something funny and warm and full of people who love each other, even when loving each other is the most irrational thing they could possibly do. The Amazing World of Gumball is not just a kids' show. It is not just an animated series. It is a mirror held up to the experience of existing in a world you did not design, following rules you did not make, trying to matter in a universe that has not promised you that you will. And it is a show that looks back at you through that mirror and laughs, not cruelly, not dismissively, but with a genuine warmth of recognition, and says, we know. We know how strange this all is. We know how fragile it is. We know how close the static always is. And we are still here, we are still going, because that is what you do. That is what Gumball and Darwin do. Every episode, every season. They get up, they face the day, they cause a completely unreasonable amount of property damage, and they find each other at the end of it. The signal is still holding. Elmore is still there. And as long as there are people watching, as long as there are people who care, it always will be. If you made it here genuinely, thank you. That means a lot. I know this was a long one, and I hope wherever you are in the world, you are feeling a little more settled, a little more comfortable, a little more at home in whatever room you are sitting in right now. This is the kind of video I make because I genuinely believe these stories matter. Not just as entertainment, but as the kind of thing that helps you feel less alone in the dark. Gumball understood that, and I hope this video in some small way did too. If you enjoyed your time here, please like this video. It tells the algorithm that this is worth sharing, and it really does help reach more people who might need this kind of thing at 2 in the morning. Subscribe to Watterson Lore if you want more deep dives like this one. There is always more to explore, more to find, more strange and wonderful things buried in the shows that shaped us. And leave a comment. Tell me your favorite episode. Tell me your favorite character. Tell me what Gumball means to you because I genuinely want to know. Sleep well. The Void is not going to win tonight. Good night. Watterson Lore. Deep dives into the stories that stay with you. Bonus deep dive. The episodes the show used to say things it probably shouldn't have been able to say. There is a category of Gumball episode that deserves its own conversation. These are the episodes that are not just funny and not just philosophically ambitious, but specifically episodes that seem to be testing how much a Cartoon Network children's show could get away with saying out loud. Ben Bockley and his writing team were, across 6 seasons, engaged in a fairly systematic project of seeing what the format would permit if you delivered the content correctly. The answer, it turned out, was quite a lot. The episode The Words is a Season 2 episode in which Darwin gets a song stuck in his head, a song about telling the truth, and cannot stop saying exactly what he thinks to everybody he encounters. The premise is a comedy premise. The execution becomes progressively more uncomfortable because the things Darwin says are not absurd or wrong. They are accurate. He tells people things that are true and painful and that social convention requires them not to hear, and the reaction is not comedy in the usual sense. It is the specific discomfort of recognizing that the social fabric that holds daily life together is built on agreed-upon silence, on the mutual decision not to say the thing everyone is already thinking. The show is not moralizing here. It is not telling you that honesty is bad or that the truth should be suppressed. It is doing something more precise. It is showing you what social life actually looks like when the maintenance work stops, when the effort of keeping the acceptable fictions running is suddenly abandoned. What you see is not freedom. What you see is people in pain. Darwin is not wrong. He is just unwilling to do the work that everyone else is doing to keep the peace. And the show is honest about the fact that the work of keeping the peace is real work, that it costs something, and that the world would be a considerably worse place if everyone stopped doing it. This is not a lesson that most children's shows are willing to sit with. Most children's shows resolve it in one of 2 ways. Either honesty is good, and the temporary discomfort is worth it, or white lies are kind and the truth should sometimes be withheld. Gumball refuses both resolutions. The episode ends. Life continues. Nobody is entirely right. The song stops. Darwin goes back to the usual maintenance, but you have seen it now and you cannot unsee it. The episode The Internet is one of the show's most direct engagements with contemporary internet culture, and it manages the remarkable trick of being a genuinely accurate portrait of how online communities behave while remaining appropriate for the age group it is nominally addressed to. Gumball becomes famous online and then infamous online and then forgotten online, all within the same episode, which is a more accurate description of the life cycle of internet celebrity than most adult satire manages. The episode The Slide follows Richard as he tries to use an early dating app and encounters, in rapid succession, almost every kind of person that dating apps reliably produce. The comedy is broad enough to land for the audience that Cartoon Network intends, but specific enough that the adult viewers who are also watching recognize exactly what they are looking at. The writers clearly had personal experience with the phenomenon they were depicting, and that experience informs the precision of the jokes. The episode The Safety is about the limits of protective parenting and the specific damage that comes from preventing children from experiencing any form of risk. Darwin becomes safety-obsessed after a presentation at school and begins wrapping everyone and everything in protective material, cutting off experience, movement, and ordinary life in the name of prevention. The episode is gentle in its criticism. It is not savage about the impulse to protect, which it acknowledges as genuinely loving. But it is clear about the but. Wrapping things in protective layers is not the same as keeping them safe. It is the same as keeping them from living. The show has already made this point through Penny and through Granny JoJo and through the Fitzgerald family's generational shell wearing. The safety makes it again from a different angle, which is exactly the kind of internal consistency that rewards attentive watching. The episode The Void is the one that establishes the show's entire existential framework in a single installment, and it does it without fanfare, without treating it as a major revelation, without signaling that what it is saying is the kind of thing that is going to become the show's central mythology for the next 4 seasons. It presents the concept, explores it, resolves the immediate problem, and moves on. Only in retrospect does the weight of what it established become fully legible. The episode The Question is Season 5's most direct engagement with pure philosophy. Darwin asks Gumball what the point of life is. This is not a setup for a joke. It is a genuine question, treated with genuine seriousness, at least initially. The episode follows them through a series of responses: hedonism, productivity, religious faith, nihilism, and finds all of them insufficient. The resolution is not a resolution. It is an acknowledgement that the question is real, and that the lack of a definitive answer is itself a feature rather than a bug of human existence. You will probably not find a cleaner depiction of philosophical inquiry in children's animation than The Question. It is 11 minutes long, and it handles material that entire university courses are built around. The episode The Upgrade is about obsolescence, specifically Bobert's fear of being replaced by a newer model. The episode's dark reading, that Bobert's entire existence is conditional on his technological relevance, and that the moment a better version of him exists, he will be both functionally and existentially superseded. Is the show applying its void logic to the specific anxiety of technology? In a world where your right to exist depends on your usefulness, a machine that can be updated is a machine that can be replaced. And a machine that has been replaced has, in Elmore's ontological logic, effectively ceased to exist. The episode plays this as comedy, but the analogy to human obsolescence anxiety, the fear that you are no longer the latest model, that someone younger or faster or more capable is going to take your place, is not buried very deep. The episode The Boredom is one of the show's most formally audacious choices. Gumball and Darwin spend the entire 11 minutes trying and failing to find something interesting to do. Every attempt collapses. Every promising avenue turns out to be a dead end. The episode is about the specific experience of being bored in a world that is supposed to be full of things to do. And it is deliberately slow, deliberately uneventful, deliberately willing to let the comedy breathe at the pace of genuine boredom rather than the pace of cartoon timing. It is also, within the show's existential framework, an extremely dangerous episode to have made. Because if The Void targets boring things, an episode about boredom is an episode about the conditions that trigger erasure. The fact that the episode exists, that it survived production, that it made it to air as a full 11-minute exploration of nothing happening, is its own small act of defiance against the show's internal logic. The episode The Rerun, the second half of the disaster/rerun two-parter, contains what I consider the single most emotionally precise moment in the show's entire 6-season run. Rob has used the universal remote to show Gumball what life without the people he loves would look like. He has undone Gumball's relationship with Penny. He has erased Darwin. He has watched Gumball's world collapse. And then Gumball reaches out to him, genuinely, without strategy, out of actual guilt and actual recognition of what Rob has been through. He extends something real. And Rob, who has spent his entire existence in the show, being the character that nobody saw, being the background extra who fell into the void and came back wrong, and became the villain because the villain was the only role left, looks at this genuine act of human connection and makes a choice. He erases it. He uses the remote to undo not just the damage he caused, but the reconciliation that followed, because the reconciliation only exists because of the damage, and the damage cannot stand. He chooses to erase the one moment of genuine connection he has ever experienced in order to make things right. And nobody knows. That is the point. Nobody knows what he gave up. Gumball will not remember. The audience knows and Rob knows, and that is it. He has performed an act of profound self-sacrifice in complete privacy, with no witness, no recognition, no reward. He has been, for one moment, the kindest character in the show, and he has done it in a way that guarantees he will receive no credit for it. That is Rob Rotten. That is the character Ben Bacalé built from a background extra and a void. That is where a blue Cyclops who was considered too uninteresting to exist ended up 8 seasons later, standing in the wreckage of a reality he chose to fix, watching the memory of his one chance at friendship dissolve, and then getting up and going back to being the villain because the story still needs one. If that is not extraordinary storytelling, I do not know what is. Bonus deep dive. The Watterson family as a unit. Why they work when they should not. The Watterson family should not work. As a functional unit, as a domestic structure, as a portrait of a family that is going to produce well-adjusted children who understand how to move through the world, they should not work at all. The mother is carrying a childhood of emotional abuse that she has never fully processed, expressed through superhuman competence and barely controlled rage and an inability to relax that the show has established, is not a personality trait, but a nervous system response to conditions she encountered before she was old enough to choose her own reactions to them. The father is a man whose own childhood left him without the tools to function as an adult in the conventional sense, who has been cosmically prevented from ever developing those tools by a universe that would rather tear itself apart than allow him to have a job, who operates at all times at the level of a child in the body of a large pink rabbit, and who is nonetheless somehow one of the most genuinely loving parents in the history of animated television. The eldest child is a 12-year-old blue cat who responds to every situation with the chaotic energy of someone who has, on some level, understood that the universe might delete him for being boring, and has decided that the safest response to that threat is to never, ever stop being interesting. He causes more property damage per episode than most natural disasters cause per decade. He is also, in the moments when the show lets him be, genuinely, deeply sweet. The second child is a goldfish who should not exist, who should not have legs, who should not have speech, who should not have the interior life he clearly possesses, and who is either the most genuinely good-natured person in Elmore or a personality construct installed by a universe that needed a specific kind of character in a specific role. He loves everyone he encounters, including people who have actively tried to harm him, with a consistency that either represents sainthood or programming. And the show has never fully resolved which reading is correct. The youngest child is 4 years old and smarter than everyone she has ever met, and completely unable to do anything useful with that intelligence in the specific context of being 4 years old and surrounded by people who are not interested in the philosophical implications of what they are experiencing. She is the loneliest member of the family in the way that extremely intelligent children in families of otherwise normal intelligence are always lonely. Because the gap between what she understands and what anyone around her is willing to engage with on that level is simply too wide to bridge without more time and more growing. This family, by any reasonable assessment, is a disaster. They should be a cautionary tale. They should produce the kind of children who spend their adult lives in therapy processing the specific ways their upbringing prepared them for everything except ordinary life. And yet, the thing about the Wattersons is that they love each other, not in the performed, surface way that fictional families often love each other. The group hug at the end of the lesson, the tearful reconciliation, the promise to do better. They love each other in the specific, inconsistent, sometimes infuriating, frequently chaotic, completely reliable way that real families love each other. They fight. They let each other down. They cause each other genuine harm sometimes. They do not always understand each other. They do not always try as hard as they should, but they show up. Every episode, every crisis, every universe-threatening catastrophe, they show up for each other. Nicole shows up. Richard shows up in his way, which is the only way he has. Gumball and Darwin show up for each other with a consistency that is the emotional bedrock of the entire series. Anais shows up for everyone, even when no one is paying attention to her, because she has decided that caring is worth doing even when it goes unacknowledged. The Choices, the episode that tells the story of how Nicole and Richard ended up together, is the show's fullest argument for why the Watterson family makes sense. It is not an argument from logic. It is an argument from love. Nicole chose Richard because he was the only person she had ever encountered who would not demand from her the specific kind of performance her upbringing had built her to deliver. He did not want her to be perfect. He was incapable of wanting that. He just wanted her. And in a life that had contained very little of being wanted exactly as you are, that was everything. The show understands that this choice was also, practically speaking, a choice to carry more than her share. It does not romanticize that. Nicole carries the family because of a complex set of choices, circumstances, and personality traits that were shaped by things that happened to her before she was old enough to consent to being shaped by them. The show is honest about that cost, and the show is also honest about the fact that she made the choice knowingly, and she would make it again, and the love that motivated it is real. Richard's contribution is less visible but not less important. The Watterson children will grow up knowing what it feels like to be loved unconditionally, without performance, without the expectation of achievement or productivity or anything other than being themselves. That experience is, for most of human history and in most families and across most cultures, not available by default. It has to be provided deliberately by someone who is willing to be the soft place that everyone else lands. Richard is that, consistently, without drama, without acknowledgement, without anyone necessarily noticing. Gumball and Darwin will know what it is to be a team. They will know what it is to have someone who has seen every version of you, including the versions you are not proud of, and stayed. They will know that loyalty is a practice and not a feeling, that it is made of small daily choices to show up for the person next to you, even when showing up is inconvenient or frustrating or not obviously in your interest. Anais will know, when she is old enough for it to matter, what it means to be the smartest person in a room that loves you anyway. Not for your intelligence, not despite your intelligence. Just for you, independent of any of your qualities, because you are part of the family, and the family is the thing that holds. This is what the Wattersons produce, not perfectly, not without cost, not without the damage that accumulates in every family across every generation, but with enough love, enough reliability, enough stubborn refusal to stop showing up, that the children they are raising will have something to work with. A foundation, a reference point, a sense of what it feels like to matter to people without needing to earn it. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, nearly everything. Bonus deep dive. What the show gets right about growing up that other shows do not. The amazing world of Gumball is set, for most of its run, in middle school. Gumball and Darwin and Penny and the rest of the Elmore junior high cast are 12 years old or thereabouts, navigating the specific landscape of early adolescence. And the show treats the experience of being that age with more honesty than almost anything else that has been produced for that demographic. Middle school is a particular kind of institution. It is the place where you are no longer small enough to be forgiven for everything and not yet old enough to have figured out who you are. You are in between. You are in transition. You are, in the precise clinical language of developmental psychology, undergoing the most significant identity formation of your life. Trying on selves the way you try on clothes, discovering that some of them fit and some of them do not, and doing all of this under the social microscope of several hundred other people who are doing exactly the same thing. Gumball gets this right in a way that very few shows aimed at this age group manage to. It gets the specific quality of middle school social dynamics right, the way hierarchies form and shift, the way reputation is built and destroyed, the way the stakes of social standing feel cosmically large, even when you understand intellectually that they are not. It gets the specific quality of friendship at this age right, the intensity of it, the fragility of it, the way a single afternoon can make or break something that felt permanent. It gets the specific quality of the relationship between a boy and a girl who like each other and have absolutely no framework for how to express that without the whole thing immediately becoming the most embarrassing event in the history of the school. Gumball and Penny spend 3 seasons unable to say out loud the thing that is entirely obvious to everyone around them. The show plays this as comedy. The awkwardness, the near misses, the catastrophic attempts at romantic expression. But it is also an accurate portrait of what it actually feels like to be 12 and in love for the first time, when the gap between what you feel and what you can articulate is so wide that falling into it seems like the most likely outcome of any attempt to bridge it. When they do finally tell each other how they feel, in the climax of the show does not play it for laughs. It plays it straight. It gives the moment its weight. Gumball has just chased a girl in the form of a monster through the streets of Elmore, not because he was trying to stop her, but because he needed to tell her something, and what he tells her, not framed as a declaration, not performed for an audience, just said to her face, is that she is beautiful, that he has always known she is beautiful, that the thing she thinks makes her a monster is not a monster. And she believes him. And she becomes the fairy. This is a children's show landing an emotional punch that most adult romantic dramas fumble. The reason it lands is that the show has done the work. It has spent 3 seasons establishing who these two people are, what they mean to each other, what it costs Penny to be seen, and what it costs Gumball to be the one seeing. The payoff is earned because the setup was genuine. The show also gets something right about friendship that is underrepresented in children's media. The friendship between Gumball and Darwin is not conflict-free. They fight. They hurt each other. There are episodes built entirely around the damage they can do to each other, and the specific kinds of harm that are only available to people who know each other as well as they do. The show does not pretend that intimacy is safe, that being close to someone means never being hurt by them. It shows the friction and the repair. It shows the work. In The Bros, Darwin fears that Gumball's relationship with Penny is going to cost him his best friend. His response is not noble. It is small and petty and recognizably human. He schemes, he manipulates, he tries to make himself indispensable by making himself the victim of a situation he is helping to create. And when it is over, and Gumball knows what Darwin did, they repair it not through a grand gesture but through the kind of quiet honesty that only people who really trust each other are capable of. They say the difficult thing. They mean it. They move forward. That is what the show understands about growing up that so many other shows do not. It is not the big moments that make you. It is the small ones. The decisions you make when nobody is watching. The repairs you are willing to make when you have caused damage. The things you are willing to say out loud when saying them is harder than staying quiet. Gumball and Darwin say those things. Every episode. In between the chaos and the slapstick and the extraordinary comedy that makes the show what it is, they say the things that matter to each other. And that is why, when the show reaches for its biggest emotional moments, they land. Because the foundation has been built, quietly, episode by episode, in the space between the jokes. Bonus Deep Dive. The International Life of a Global Show. The Amazing World of Gumball was produced by a team that was itself international. Bockelay is French, the show was made in Britain, it aired on an American network, and it was broadcast in over 160 countries, with dozens of different dubbing and translation teams producing versions for their specific audiences. This international reach created some fascinating variations. In some territories, the photographic backgrounds, drawn from London streets, were partially replaced with backgrounds from local environments to make the show feel more grounded in the audience's own geography. In others, the English-language puns and wordplay that are woven through the dialogue presented translation challenges that the dubbing teams had to solve creatively, finding jokes that worked in their own language's logic, rather than attempting direct translations that would lose the humor entirely. The French dub, perhaps reflecting the nationality of the show's creator, has been noted by bilingual fans as capturing the show's specific tonal register particularly well. Bockelay has spoken in French-language interviews with a warmth about the show's reception in France that suggests the recognition of the show's sensibility in his home country meant something to him. The show's Japanese broadcast introduced Gumball to an animation culture with its own extremely developed vocabulary for the kinds of themes Gumball was exploring. And the response from Japanese audiences to the show's meta-awareness, its playing with genre conventions, its willingness to fold the mechanics of animation into its storytelling, was notably enthusiastic. The crossover appeal makes sense. Anime has been doing formally similar things for decades, and the audience that has grown up with that tradition recognized a kindred sensibility. The Chinese situation is its own complicated chapter. Miracle Star, the show that plagiarized The Amazing World of Gumball extensively enough that CN took legal action, aired on Chinese streaming platforms and accumulated enough of an audience that the Copycats episode, the direct response to the plagiarism, became a genuinely significant cultural event for Chinese fans of the original show, who were already aware of the situation. The episode was received there as a direct communication from the original show to its Chinese audience, an acknowledgement of the plagiarism that was also, somehow, a form of inclusion. "We know you are out there," the episode seemed to say. "We see what happened. We made a whole thing about it." The Latin American dub has its own devoted following, with voice performances that the Spanish-speaking fanbase has argued. In some cases captured particular characters better than the English original, a claim that is genuinely difficult to adjudicate but reflects the depth of investment that the international audience brought to the show. The show's availability on streaming in the revival period has created a new kind of international audience, one that can watch the original 6 seasons and the new revival simultaneously, that does not have to wait for broadcast schedules, that can encounter the show at any age and in any order. This has produced a generation of international fans who came to Gumball through the revival rather than through the original run, who are discovering the 6 seasons of back catalog as a complete object rather than as something that unfolded in real time. For those viewers, the show is a different experience than it was for the audience who grew up with it in real time. The cliffhanger ending of The Inquisition is not a cliffhanger for them. Rob's arc is already complete when they encounter it. The questions that hung unresolved for 6 years are questions they can answer immediately by watching the next available thing. In some ways, this is a better way to encounter the show. The experience of the whole thing, the full arc, without the years of uncertainty in between. In other ways, it loses something that was genuinely important about the real-time experience. The sense of having waited, of having not known, of having arrived at the revival the way the show always said its audience would keep Elmore alive, by choosing to return. The show has always understood that its audience is the other half of its existence. It said so explicitly in The Inquisition, in The Joy, in every meta moment when it looked out through the fourth wall and acknowledged that it knew it was being watched. And the fact that new audiences are finding it, are choosing to return to a world that very nearly ended in static, means that Elmore keeps existing, means the signal keeps holding, means Ben Bakalay's rejected characters, gathered from the slush pile of his career, and given a home in a world built from London photographs, are still alive in the way that fictional characters can be alive. Still watched, still loved, still telling their story. Bonus Deep Dive: the supporting cast and the stories the show only half told. One of the things that makes Gumball extraordinary is what it implies about the lives of its secondary characters. The show gives you enough to understand that everyone in Elmore has a complete interior life, a history, a set of experiences that preceded the episodes you are watching, and then it trusts you to imagine the rest. William is a winged eyeball. He appears in crowd scenes, in the background of classroom shots, in group activities. He does not speak in the early seasons. When he is eventually given dialogue, he speaks in a formal, precise way that suggests someone who has been observing, rather than participating, for a very long time. The fan theory that William is watching everything, gathering information, functioning as some kind of ambient intelligence in the school, is not directly contradicted by anything the show offers. The show simply leaves space for it. Carmen the cactus and Alan the balloon have the most structurally impossible relationship in the show. Every physical expression of their love causes harm. Every hug pops him. Every touch draws blood. They have decided that this is worth it, that the harm that comes from loving each other is a price they are willing to pay. which is either the show's most romantic gesture or its darkest comment on what love costs. Perhaps both. Perhaps especially both. Banana Joe's role as class clown is performed with the specific, desperate energy of someone who has understood that being funny is the only currency he has and is investing everything in it. His mother can see the future, and his father takes very long baths, and Joe is somewhere in the middle of all of that, being relentlessly a joke. There is a sadness to it that the show never quite addresses, but never quite covers up either. Rocky Robinson, the school janitor and aspiring rock musician, is the Robinsons' son, which makes him the child of the two most miserable people in Elmore, who is nonetheless one of the most cheerful. He has somehow escaped the Robinson pattern of withdrawal and protest. He has found his way into the world on his own terms. The show never explains how. It just gives you Rocky, warm, laid back, playing his guitar in the janitor's closet, genuinely happy to be there, and trusts you to find that remarkable given what you know about his parents. The character of Sussy remains the show's most formally radical choice. A live-action Chin with googly eyes, voiced, and physically portrayed by the creator's own girlfriend, Sussy occupies a space in the show's visual hierarchy that nothing else occupies. She is not the most realistically rendered character in the show. That would be the photographic backgrounds. She is not the most abstractly rendered. That would be Alan the Balloon. She is something else entirely. She is the point where the show's willingness to include any visual register reaches its absolute limit, the character that tests whether the premise of everyone looking different can stretch to include a literal piece of live-action human anatomy. It can. Sussy works. Not because she makes visual sense, but because the show has established from the very beginning that visual sense is not a requirement for existence in Elmore. You exist because you exist. Your specific form is not the point. The point is whether you show up, whether you participate, whether you are there. Sussy is there, every crowd scene, every hallway shot, every cafeteria moment. She is there, impossible and strange and somehow completely natural. In a world where Gumball and a potato have PE class together, her presence is the show's most constant argument for its own central thesis. You do not have to make sense, you just have to be. And that thesis, that existence does not require justification, that being here is its own argument for being here, is what the show has been making all along. From Rob, the background extra who fell into the void and came back as a villain, who became a prophet, who became a guardian. From Darwin, the goldfish who evolved because he was loved. From Nicole, who survived a difficult childhood by becoming stronger than anyone should have to be. From Richard, who never got to become the person he might have been and became, instead, the father his children needed. From Penny, who broke out of the shell her family spent generations building and found, on the other side of it, that she was beautiful. From Ben Bockley, who spent years making characters nobody wanted and then made them a world. The amazing world of Gumball began with rejects. It built something extraordinary from them. It made them matter, not because the universe granted them significance, but because the show insisted on it. Episode after episode, season after season. It made you care about a blue cat and a goldfish and a banana who can paint the future. It made you stay up past the point when you should have been asleep, listening to someone talk about the existential implications of a children's cartoon, because somewhere in all of it, something was saying something true. The signal is still holding. Elmore is still there. The static is just background noise, and that, when you stay with it long enough, when the room is quiet and the night is deep and the dark theories have done their work and the show has given you everything it has to give, is enough. It is enough to be here. It is enough to be watching. It is enough to be the thing that keeps the world alive by choosing to care about it. Good night.